All right, we'll call the meeting to order. And Mayor Brook is not here this evening, but let's start with the roll call.
Mayor Brook. Deputy Mayor Dexter.
Here.
Councilmember French.
Here.
Councilmember Kidd.
Here.
Councilmember Meredith.
Here.
Councilmember Moran.
Here.
Councilmember Schroman Warren.
Here.
Manager West.
Present.
Attorney Bloor.
Here.
Thank you. And Councilmember Moran, will you lead the Pledge of Allegiance this evening?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay. Before we get started, I just want to take a moment to acknowledge that we are having our meeting this evening on traditional Clallam territory. And we're going to start with a proclamation. So I will meet storytelling folks up front. All right. So thank you all for coming this evening. Are we on? Yes. All right. I have the privilege this evening of reading a proclamation of Port Angeles Storytelling Week, October 14th through 20th, 2019, in recognition of the Story People of Clallam County and their 25th annual Forest Storytelling Festival. Whereas since 1995, the nonprofit, volunteer-run Story People of Clallam County has worked to fulfill its mission, which is to foster the art of oral storytelling in this community. And whereas, through the years, Story People members have conducted continuous and regular monthly story swaps in Port Angeles, sent tellers into schools, conducted skill-building storytelling workshops, held numerous special events, and performed stories at countless venues to grow storytelling in this community. And whereas, inspired by love of story, the Story People have created an annual 3-day International Forest Storytelling Festival in Port Angeles that has brought together tellers of international renown, as well as regional and local tellers, and story listeners from throughout the Pacific Northwest, including Canada, for no fewer than 25 years. And whereas, we acknowledge that oral storytelling is and always has been for all ages, and is fundamental to the way we communicate as humans, as it is found in every culture on the planet and predates the written word by millennia. And whereas, we recognize the power of stories to not only entertain, but to teach, explain, promote understanding, build empathy, nurture healing, and give hope for those who tell stories and those who listen. And whereas, we honor the vision and effort of the founders of the Story People, Josephine Peterson and Elaine Grinnell, and all those unnamed who nurtured the flame of story in the community in ways large and small. And whereas we recognize that stories come in many forms, including legends, myths, traditional folk and fairy tales, personal stories, tall tales, the teachings, historical accounts, and that even though a story didn't happen, doesn't mean it isn't true. Now, therefore, I, Kate Dexter, Deputy Mayor, on behalf of Mayor Sissy Brook and the City Council of Port Angeles, do hereby recognize the week of October 14th through 20th, 2019 as Port Angeles Storytelling Week, and urge all community members to join the celebration and activities.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. My name is Iran Sharp, and I have the honor to be on the board, president of the board of the Story People of Clallam County. And I've been asked to share a brief story with you tonight. So this is an ancient story from India. Once, long ago, there was a wise king in India. He ruled his kingdom well, with great fairness and equanimity. He was a statesman and a diplomat, avoided wars, and his country prospered. People did well and were happy. But was concern because he was growing older and he had no children to take over after him. The council, the advisors were always after him about who will be your successor, how will we choose a successor? Well, this king did much of his best thinking in his garden. He was an avid gardener and he loved to spend hours among the flowers, tending the plants, watering, snipping, taking care of these gardens. And one day he came back in from his gardens all excited. He said, "I've got it." His counselor said, "You've got what?" I know how we'll choose my successor." "Oh, do tell us." "We will have a contest. I will distribute seeds to all the children of the kingdom, and whoever in 3 months' time grows the best plant will be chosen as my successor." The council was a little confused. A wise king, we can do this, but how is growing plants good qualification for being a king? The king said, "It will be, it will be." And so it was proclaimed, and there was a certain day when all of the children and their parents were invited to the palace and were given seeds to grow. One of these children was named Pingala. He was the child of a poor farmer, but he loved to grow plants too, so he was excited. He got his seed and he took it home, and he got a pot, and he filled it with some of the best soil from the floodplain of the river on their farm, mixed in compost, he watered it, he put it in a sunny spot, and he waited. And a week later, no sprout had come up. Nothing was happening. He waited many more days, and nothing sprouted. He decided he'd better try some better soil. He dug up the seed, he got some sandy soil, he got another pot, he planted the seed, put it in a great warm sunny spot, and waited. And nothing sprouted. And he was heartbroken and disappointed. And 3 months later, the appointed day for the judging happened, and he was watching all of the children in their best clothes with their pots with big flourishing plants, great leafy foliage and beautiful flowers and fruits. But he was sitting home brokenhearted because he had nothing. His father convinced him, "Well, take your pot anyway, show it to the king, at least let him know that you tried." So Pingala, dressed in his best clothes, took his pot and joined the procession to the palace. He tried to ignore all the taunting and jeers of the other kids. "Look at him, Mr. Empty Pot. Why don't you go back to your farm where you came from, Pingala? You can't grow anything." "No one knows how to grow better plants than I do," said another kid. So Pingala joined them at the palace, and the moment came. The king came out and started passing among the children, inspecting all of their beautiful plants. But he didn't look very happy, despite the beauty of the plants. He went up and down through the rows of children, and when he came to Pingala, he said, "What is this? Why do you have an empty pot?" So Pingala, embarrassed, told him his story, his plight, how hard he had tried. And to the crowd's amazement, the king put his arm around Pingala's shoulder and said, "This is your new crown prince." What? They couldn't believe it. There was such a clamor, but he has nothing. The king explained, "The seeds that I gave were all roasted. None of them would sprout. This is the only honest child here. He is chosen to be my successor." And children clamored, and, "Oh, this contest was rigged." But no, the king was adamant. He brought Pingala into the castle, into the palace. He raised him. He taught him the arts of governing the kingdom. And when the king passed, Pingala ruled in fairness and equanimity to the rest of his days. The seed of truth.
Thank you very much. Okay, we will move on to public comment. Just a couple of notes. I don't see anyone who's currently signed in, but everyone has up to 3 minutes, and we just need you to state whether you are a resident of Port Angeles or perhaps are representing a club from Port Angeles or some other group. And if you are wanting to speak to the utilities, the budget, or the land use code changes, we will have a public hearing for all of those and would ask you to reserve those comments for the public comment period. So the first person on our list is Janet Lucas.
Hello, I'm here to tell you about a play I'm directing. I'm the president of the Port Angeles Community Players, and we are about to present the Laramie Project 10 years later. And I especially wanted to talk to all of you in light of the City Council recently adopting the Charter for Compassion. So the Laramie Project 10 years later will be this Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. The Friday and Saturday performances are at 7:30, and the Sunday performance is at 2 at the Port Angeles Community Playhouse on Lordson Boulevard. And you can get tickets for $10. It's festival seating, and you can get them either online on our website or at the door. And so with all of that detail aside, several council members and the mayor attended the original Laramie Project. And if you don't already know, the Laramie Project is a kind of a play documentary about the attitudes of people in Laramie, Wyoming following the beating death of young gay college student Matthew Shepard, which in the last 5 days of his life after the beating, it became an international incident and a catalyst for developing hate crime legislation, which actually took several years to implement. And so I would like to invite you and all of you to the Laramie Project 10 years later, where the same theater company comes back to Laramie 10 years later to examine the attitudes of the town after all this time. And what they discovered, without giving away the farm here, has much to do with our current climate of fake news over fact. And it's an interesting commentary, even though this was written and first performed in 2011. And while I'm up here, I would like to introduce our cast really quickly. If you're in the cast, please stand up. I asked them to come and be represented. And these are 4 of the over 20 people in the cast of Laramie 10 years later. And so I encourage you to come. It's a thought-provoking live action documentary, and I thank you for your attention. Is it okay if I give you some flyers? Okay,
Thank you.
thank you.
All right, next on the sign-up sheet is Annie O'Rourke.
Good evening, I'm Annie O'Rourke, and I do not reside in the city limits. The Peninsula Housing Authority, of which I am the development director, is pleased to share that in conjunction with our mutual self-help housing program, 10 deserving families will be breaking ground shortly on the west side of Port Angeles. We have a celebration planned for October 22nd at 5 p.m. at 1730 West 11th Street. I've provided invitations to all of you, and the public is welcome to attend as well. As you know, these families build these homes with our guidance and assistance, and I realize I'm a broken record about this, but they build these homes. It's not just a little paint and a little landscaping. They build these homes, right? From framing it, siding it, they're high on ladders, they're under heavy loads. These individuals are, they continue to amaze me. They're willing to subject themselves to, as I call it, the blood, sweat, and tears of the program, but they do come out on the other side with a home of their own and between $40,000 and $60,000 worth of equity. So come join us next Tuesday if you have the opportunity at 5 p.m. Thank you.
Thank you. Next on the list, Lisa Hoff. Am I saying your name correctly?
It's Hoff.
Hoff, okay, thank you.
Okay, hello, my name is Lisa Hoff, and yes, I reside in the city limits. I am here once again asking for a day shelter for the homeless. We are working on a plan to have it run strictly on volunteer basis so that we don't have the cost of staffing. We're looking for a building that can be donated to us, and we're all willing to work really hard to clean it up and make it look nice so it's not ugly for the public to see. It's getting colder, it's raining a lot. We've got people at the shelter right now that are sick with no place to go during the day. They have to be out in the elements. And we're just looking for a place to be. I have the opportunity to go to the Verizon Center during the day because I am a client of PBH. Most people don't have that opportunity, but because I do have that opportunity, I support people there. I was willing to apply for employment at different places, and I have an interview tomorrow morning for a job because I was someplace where I could have the opportunity to do that. And all most of us are asking for is the opportunity to have a place where we can go and be safe and apply for jobs and better ourselves and become productive citizens in the community. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and good luck on your job. Next on the list of sign-up is Scott Nelson.
Hi, my name is Scott Nelson. I'm basically here to help back Lisa's proposal or request for a day shelter for the homeless. It's a really needed necessity amongst this community. I mean, the medical expenses from hate crimes and stuff like that, no safe place for homeless people to go during the day, could lead to more, expenses and stuff like that. If that's a safe place to be, a good decrease could make everything a little better for everybody. And hopefully that you guys are, will consider or even, be thought of somehow, brought up, come together. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, is there anyone else? You're welcome to come and give us a public comment, regardless of whether or not you signed up. So if anyone had thoughts while they were sitting there and would like to share. All right, it doesn't look like that's the case. So I am going to recommend that we, because I think there are a number of people here for the chamber presentation, that we go ahead and have the chamber presentation now. It will mean starting the public hearing just a couple minutes late, but based on the timeline that I've been told their presentation will take, we should be good. You guys ready?
That's not good. Be a translator.
We can bear with it.
And please bear with us.
We're good.
So we're going to modify our presentation. We're going to leave the pictures
Okay.
for you. But we'll get started. Again, thanks for having us back. My name is Jim Hagwood. I'm the president of the Chamber this year. And with me is Christopher Thompson, who's the vice president of the Chamber of Commerce. Basically what we want to do is give you an update on what we've been up to since our June 18th letter and our presentation before you. I'm going to give you a little bit of background about what's been happening, and then I'm going to turn it over to Christopher, and he's going to speak more directly to the floatplane infrastructure and service opportunity that came out of this work that we did over the last couple of months. So on June 18th, we came to you, and the Chamber had written you a letter that included basically 3 recommendations and the role that the Chamber had accepted moving forward. And those included to raise and what we call activate the Phase 3 waterfront redevelopment in the city's capital facilities plan. That was number 1. Number 2 was to designate Railroad Avenue as an arterial or something of a transportation corridor, which would make it eligible for additional funding. Third was if this Phase 3 and the renovation of City Pier has occurred, that maybe the city could look at and consider other managers that maybe have a little bit more harbor and water-dependent use management of facilities like that. And the fourth was that the Chamber of Commerce, we were committed to play the role of a convener moving forward to bring all of the stakeholders together for this work that we're doing. So first of all, I want to recognize a group of people that have committed hours and hours since June 18th to deliver what you're going to see today. First of all, Christopher Thompson was the chairman of what's called the Futures and Emerging Opportunities Committee of the Chamber of Commerce, and he led all the work, and he's going to speak directly to the floatplane service and floatplane infrastructure opportunity that we see in the downtown. I want to thank Kristen Helberg and Banner Construction for their help. You'll see some of the slides and their knowledge and experience in doing Phase 2 and working on Railroad Avenue and doing a lot of the downtown work and CSO project. They have a lot of construction knowledge. They were very helpful, and also did some estimation of the costs that we're going to tell you about. Chris Fiddler was very helpful in getting us in front of the State Joint Transportation Committee a couple of weeks back, which I'll talk to. Karen Rogers also played a very important role in helping us craft the briefing paper that you have that we made available to you. And I also want to thank Edna Peterson, who's here tonight, for helping us get in contact with Derek Sommer and as we brief them. So all of those people were also involved in helping to prepare the work that we did. So this work started out on July 25th with a workshop with all of the stakeholders. And because I can't bring this up, I'm going to look at this slide so you can see. But the investors that were brought together in a workshop facilitated by the Chamber included the Red Line, Harbortown Marketplace, the Port Angeles Wharf, or which is currently called the Landing, the Rail Restaurant, the Lower Elwha Hotel, the Field Arts and Events Hall, the Elwha Cultural Events Center, Dew Park Condominium Parking Garage, and the Marine Discovery Center. So all of those investors were brought to the workshop, but also there was a series of additional stakeholders that also came and joined us. That was obviously the Chamber of Commerce and our committee, Blackwell Ferry Line, the City of Port Angeles, Allison was attended, the Port of Port Angeles, Com Transit, and the Port Angeles Downtown Association. All of those folks attended and were invited to 3 different workshops that occurred over our period of time. And while she's bringing that up, those projects also represent what I just saw on the slide where
as an outcome of the first workshop, we sent out a survey to all of those projects, asking them a series of about a dozen questions about how much they were investing, how much was public investment, private investment, what did you see as a benefit of the Phase 3 waterfront development, and how much their project, what the valuation of that was, what was going to be their future employment, all of those kinds of things. So we brought in all of that information, and so the results of that survey, which are basically the 9 projects you see highlighted right here, is that this is about $129 million of private investment that is planned for downtown Port Angeles. And I want to also take a step back, that the energy and the excitement from these people that were invited to this workshop resulted in what we call the Port Angeles Renaissance. That little image you see up there was a result of the work and their enthusiasm for what they were doing and coming together. And you'll see down at the Lower Awa Hotel, if you go down and look at their sign, they've incorporated the Renaissance image onto their signage at their site. So very exciting that they all agreed to that. But again, $129 million of private investment, new public infrastructure. This is new streets or new sidewalks and other amenities of about $9.7 million in these projects. 5 of the 9 projects will be underway by the end of the year. So this is really happening, right? And you can see a couple of them right now. 5 of the 9 projects are planned to be completed before the summer season of 2021. Okay, so that's the schedule they're on now, that 5 of those 9 projects will be done by 2021. And altogether, this is about 250 new jobs in downtown Port Angeles when these facilities become fully operational. So very exciting time, and why we, again, the group had titled this The Renaissance of Downtown Port Angeles. So part of the work we did was to analyze the Phase 3 work that had been previously done by the City of Port Angeles. And what we did is we basically approached the project in the same manner that the previous architect did in regards to how the project was broken up into its individual parts. And hopefully we'll get a picture for you here in just a second. So it's broken up into 7 different parts. Part 1 was really Railroad Avenue between Laurel and Lincoln. Yeah, let's go ahead and, yep. Hey, you got it. Perfect. Okay. So we broke it up into these eight sections that I'm going to speak to very particularly. And our approach was basically to look at the project in the same manner and the same cost structure as the previous work had been done to get our analysis of how we suggest this project went forward. But the first, what did I do? Try this again. No. I lost it.
Yeah, open that window down.
Huh? So, Deputy Mayor, we just blew your time on your yes. So, how do I go? Okay, there we go. So the first part was Railroad Avenue, and we went and reviewed what had been done on the east side during phase 1 of the waterfront redevelopment. And in this analysis, we're suggesting the deep repair of Railroad Avenue, similar to what was done in phase 1 where the promenade is. And basically, this is an example of what the Railroad Avenue looks like where the promenade was done, and this is what the area that we're talking about that needs to be rebuilt in phase 3. And what's causing that street to buckle and crack and all that is that it's built on trestles. And where the promenade was built, that was a permanent fix. So in this analysis, we're suggesting that the city proceed with a permanent fix to Railroad Avenue. As we move forward into the second piece, which is basically the intersection and the beach repair. So this includes basically upgrading all of the parking lots, doing what the architect had suggested in the beach improvements, upgrades to the performance stage. We'll talk about the floatplane infrastructure and all that, which is included in this analysis. The last part is the pier itself. When the architect did that original work, they didn't include the cost of the new pilings that need to be included in the pier upgrade, so we included that in our analysis also. So all of that analysis suggested about a $20 million project. Redoing Railroad Avenue, basically upgrading the pier. This proposal does not suggest removing the current Faro Marine Lab, but that there are new opportunities for that building in conjunction with what Christopher's going to talk about in just a second with floatplane service and floatplane infrastructure at the pier. So this was about, again, we're estimating around a $20 million project. At the conclusion of this, and this does not include what is going to come up with the black ball in the Coho Ferry dock. The Coho Ferry is making decisions right now in regards to pre or post clearance, how immigration and customs are going to work together and what that means to their operation. But what we do know is that also is going to realign and affect what happens on Railroad Avenue. So that discussion has also happened and sort of came about as we were doing this work. So just to give you a brief update, you have the briefing paper. We personally briefed Congressman Kilmer, Representatives Theringer and Chapman, and were able to present before the Washington State Joint Transportation Committee on the Coho, as a matter of fact, when they were going over to Victoria. So those folks have been briefed on the work we've done and the suggestions that are in that paper. So what I want to do is turn it over to Christopher and let him speak to particularly the floatplane service and infrastructure element of this and how big an opportunity we think that is. So Christopher, go ahead.
So thank you. One of the things that Jim mentioned is we did meet in July 25th for our first Renaissance workshop. And we shared with all the members there, the stakeholders, members from the city, members from the Port of Port Angeles. We shared with them phase 3 and what it entailed, what it looked like, some of the components of it. But towards the end of that meeting, a couple of the stakeholders, and namely Eric Marks, who owns the wharf, Eric Dupar, who's going to be building the condominium, said, we see this floatplane mentioned in there, and what does that mean, and what can we do to bring that back, knowing that we don't currently have land-based transportation scheduled flights out of here, or we don't have floatplanes. But for some reason, that was in phase 3. So what I promised to do, and with Jim's help, was why don't we contact Dan Gase, our airport manager, put you at least in touch with him. John Nutter was part of the original Renaissance, and they also suggested speaking with Corey Delacat. So what we did is, shortly after that meeting, we started doing a little bit of research, meeting with the city and looking up and finding some old photographs. And the one you see here goes back to, I believe it's the 1980s, 90s. There, in fact, was seaplane service. There was a dock, at least, for seaplanes to come in and out of. It doesn't exist anymore. But attached to that, and looking at another historical aerial view of that is, and before the Faro Marine Center was built, you can see that the docks were there as well. You can see that the ship was based there, and the floatplane had the ability to come in and out. So more recently, this really got a lot of us sort of excited about this project. Several of these folks from these meetings went to different floatplane docks and areas around our area, British Columbia, up in the islands. I went over to Victoria to sort of visit and see what they had there. came back and flew over the city to look down, get some aerial shots. And this is a recent one from August, on a nice clear day here in Port Angeles. And so what you see there is, although it's not present, it was at one time there were seaplane docks or float docks. And so what we've circled there is that would be the area that we would like to bring the docks back into. The second part that we learned really a lot of this work, unbeknownst to us, was being done by Dan Gates. He was actively sort of working on getting a designation for float planes, and within a couple of days sent this over to me and indicated that we had received approval from the FAA for an actual seaplane lane. It is designated as W66, and you can see it right here between Olympic Medical Center and the downtown city pier. So flying back and forth for landing and taking off. And just this month, I believe it was on Monday, Dan Gates sent over a designation. It's now on the maps. So it officially is there was a float plane, a lane for landing and taking off. The problem is they can land and take off. We don't currently yet have docks. So that's why we sort of got to work on that piece as well. So in speaking with Dan Gates, he said, well, there's a little bit of work that had been done with by Corey Delicat. So Jim and I met with Corey and a little bit of information there and sort of shared our enthusiasm, shared the enthusiasm with the stakeholders. We also suggested that this is a project that could be done right now, sort of outside of phase 3 and getting all the funding for that. There was also an offer by some of the stakeholders to say we could do this possibly with both private and public funds, to which most people that we spoke to, including Corey, John, and Dan, said that's probably a good idea and probably how it can happen. One of the things that Dan also had shared with us that we didn't know had taken place was an economic impact study by the Washington Seaplane Pilots Association. There was a lot of interest in Port Angeles, and you can read the quotation down below on one of their slides. Bringing seaplanes to your community brings tourism, prestige, and access. There are immediate and tangible economic benefits to seaplanes. So we understood that part, and then looking through it, there's all kinds of benefits that we could see economically it would benefit Port Angeles and our community. Also, as part of that impact study, and I just pulled out a couple of points, they shared with us seaplane rates ranging from what they, these are average seaplane rates in and around our area, from $59 per passenger for a short flight up to $500 for a much longer flight. One of the interesting things you just see on the left-hand side of this slide is out of the top 10 designations or places with or would like to set up seaplane service, you'll see Port Angeles ranks up there as number 6 out of the top 10. There are more there, but I think the significant part of this is Port Angeles is up there, and there is a tremendous desire by the association to somehow get someone or some help to set up that seaplane service in the dock so they could land in and out. The other interesting thing, there's a number of items that they shared within that impact study that I think we could share with all of you if you'd like to take a closer look at it. But 24-hour period, a seaplane passenger or someone on crew, they would spend an average of $283 if we came in and stayed overnight. So there is a significant impact there. So what have we done in the meantime? Well, there's a lot of excitement, there's a lot of enthusiasm. Our stakeholders really want this to happen, some of them for more selfish reasons because they have projects here in Port Angeles but live elsewhere and would like to get back and forth sometimes more quickly than driving around the canal or through the ferries. So there's really the enthusiasm there. But with the help from Corey and John Nutter and Dan Gates, we started to do our own due diligence, and that was to look out and start talking to some of the experts that build these float planes and these anchoring systems. To date, we have made contact with Alpha Marine, which is the premier anchoring system. It's a design system that anchors these kinds of docks to the ocean or seabed itself. They're manufactured in Sweden. They're very used to handling high waves, high winds, all the kind of things that we might see in a pretty big storm. We've also been in contact with marine floats. One is these is out of Tacoma, Topper Floats, which already has provided the floats or docks that you see down there today for the boats that come in and out. So those are Topper Floats, know our area well and know this community and the location. And then out of Seattle is Waterfront Construction Incorporated. So in the meantime, we have done a lot of work to contact these folks, and in the middle, we have gone through a very extensive, what we call it sort of a criteria format. The Marine Center and some of the researchers there have helped us put some of that information together as what's at the bottom of the area out there in the water, what kind of waves do we have occur, high and low temperatures, wind and all that. So a lot of the community and with that kind of expertise has come together and helped us actually prepare what Alpha Marine said was a very extensive criteria sheet that we submitted to them. So based on that, what you see on the right-hand side to date, we still have others to secure, but the anchoring system itself, they're called C-Flex, they're made in Sweden, that's about $59,000. Now that would be systems that would be anchoring the floats to the ocean or the harbor floor and would secure it, and according to them and the other float manufacturers, they wouldn't have to be removed during the winter season and stored somewhere off-site and then brought back in. So this could actually anchor them securely and allow for float plane service 12 months of the year. A floating dock, for what has been suggested, is about 200 to 215 feet, is about $172,000. And if for some reason we couldn't use the gangways or ramps that are already there, it's been suggested that, as you see here, a 100-foot long is $80,000, and a 200-foot long section would be about $156,000. So we're not done yet. I still have several others that have promised to give you their information. But before we sort of sign off here and say thank you, what I would like to finish by saying here is, in concluding, is that our objective back on June 18th, when we met with you and we presented you with the letter, was to identify those 4 key points that Jim provided. Then we went back to conduct our own research on phase 3 and determine what needed to be done and what it would cost, and then prepare a position paper, which is sort of what we have done and we provided to you as well. So we've done that, and it's our hopes and that we trust that you're going to be able to share that with the entire council, share that with staff, review our position paper, and the packet of information that we've provided the city council and staff, and from that point, then take the lead. But I'd like to say on behalf of the Chamber, Jim and Mark, who is here, and Ed and Peterson, the Chamber continues to be here. We were received very nicely and very well by you from our June 18th meeting. We're prepared and ready to continue to support, continue to act as the convener if needed and if desired. So with that, I conclude our presentation, and thank you very much for your questions.
Thank you. Yeah, council, any questions? Jim?
Having worked with the Rowing Association in the past, trying to put down a dock and a pier for launching racing shells, many challenges arose from the Department of Fish and Wildlife and the Corps of Engineers. I'm just wondering if you've come across those challenges yet, and have you how's your progress been in because putting that dock down? I'm sure Fish and Wildlife and the Corps of Engineers are going to want to have a say as to how you progress on that.
That's an excellent question, and we have been, certainly Corey and Dan and others have alerted us to that fact that would be one of the obstacles in addition to the permitting should we get the funding for all this and we're able to go ahead. Several of these companies that I listed up here have expertise and have said that would be part of the package to help us work with the Corps of Engineers, which we've been told by many people it's probably the longest amount of time that we'll be involved with the Corps of Engineers. Just today, Ryan Mullane of Blackball, who was already working with the DNR, has offered to set the meeting with us to have those discussions so that we can present what we're doing here and make sure that we're fully informed, fully engaged, and start that process. I'll say, we realize there's an amount of time ahead to get all those pieces in place, so we want to start now and make sure that we're introduced to and working with the right people. Having said that, here's an interesting note, is that we have also, again, Ryan Mullane of Blackball introduced us to a very interested float plane operation or business out of Canada. They came and told us several weeks ago that they've got their approval to begin charter flights, and they would like to begin flights in May 1st. So we've got a deadline that we're sort of trying to meet. It may not be realistic, but they've also gone to those, let's say, operations and working with, on several of their float plane docks, and will be very helpful to us. But they are excited. They're coming back. I think this is their 3rd time to visit us from Port Angeles to see and work with us on these Renaissance workshops. They'll be here for the groundbreaking of the Arts and Events Hall. So they're very excited by this and see the potential and the economic impact it'll make on us and the business for them. So we got our work cut out, but the expertise, and I think bringing together this workshop with all these stakeholders, the amount of expertise in that from the Port of Port Angeles and the city, the expertise is there, and I think us convening it has really helped to share the information and communicate and sort of shorten the time that it takes to get something done.
Mike, you have something?
So I'm the council representative to the Chamber of Commerce, and I didn't attend any of the Renaissance meetings, but I did attend one of the planning meetings leading up to it, and it's a really exciting process that's been going on. I will say that just being in the room when we were doing the planning with a lot of people that were planning large-scale developments in the downtown Port Angeles, a lot of great conversations come of those meetings, and I can't imagine the energy in the room when you have your Renaissance meetings. So I think that it's really crucial for the business community to have a voice in the process as we're talking about the public side of planning, whether it's going to be a capital facilities plan project or what. And I think that the second part of that is we've had the Renaissance meetings with all these different stakeholders. I think the next stakeholder is the public, and I really appreciate you making this public presentation, bringing the public in to see all the planning that's going on, all the potential projects that are happening, and I'm really excited. I'm just really excited. I think that this is really great work by the Chamber of Commerce. I appreciate the leadership role that you've taken.
So thanks for that. We appreciate that. And just to let you know, we feel that the Chamber's role is to start the movement, the momentum, to sort of set the table and prepare that for the city to take over and be the lead and run with it from here. Like Christopher said, I think the Chamber can still play a role as a convener, but at this moment in time, our job was, when we brought all these people together, was to introduce them to each other. They've never met each other. Understand what their challenges are, where there's opportunities, but also build trust with them and open up a productive line of communication, and that's what we did. So we completely agree with you, but that wasn't our objective or our task at this point in time for that. So, but thank you very much.
Deputy Mayor and Council, I just want to say a few words. I'm really appreciative to know that the Chamber of Commerce dedicated the time to this effort, to know that multiple Chamber member businesses actually committed resources to doing this homework that ultimately City Council asked them to do this past June. But we greatly appreciate the follow-through that the Chamber of Commerce completed and all the work that went into this report. And certainly we're very excited to hear, one, that we have over $142 million worth of investment taking place in our downtown. Couldn't be more excited about that, but we're greatly appreciative of the amount of resources and effort that went into this, so thank you.
Thank you. And Sherry? Oh, good.
This is really, I really appreciate what you've done and what you're presenting. 12 years ago, the PA Forward Committee opened the topic of our waterfront transportation improvement project, and it's taken a long time with lots of studies, and then the AIA grant, then they came to Port Angeles, and we still have that, and that's still a guideline, and this just, but we got to a point where we did all we could with the funds that we had, and then we're just waiting for the opportunity to complete it. So I think this just kind of fits right in with what we've been doing, and we appreciate that, and I think this gives us a little more forward momentum to keep on going, and we love what's happened, and we love now the vision for what's going to happen, so thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. Anything else?
Can I make a motion? I move that we have staff examine the floodplain proposal for possible inclusion in the capital facilities plan and report back to us at a future council meeting on that. Second.
Okay. Any discussion on that motion?
Well, I believe that Mr. Gase has most of the information on that. He's done the work and the research, and he's actually the one that's put that together primarily.
So I think the motion is to direct staff, they could get that information from him, but to bring it back to us at some point to consider including it in the capital facilities plan.
Correct.
So,
Yeah, and the word plane is not in the capital facilities plan right now.
okay. So we have a motion on the table. Do we have a second? Yes, thank you. All those in favor of the motion, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? It passes unanimously. So thank you very much for your presentation. Thank you for including more details in the packet for us. That's always helpful. Give us time to dig into it a little bit more. And we look forward to talking to you again soon. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we will move right into our first public hearing, proposed adjustments to the 2020 utility rates. And Nathan, you're going to take that?
Madam Deputy Mayor and Council, tonight we have again before you the second reading of utility rates, and I just want to express appreciation for all the hard work that City Council, our Utility Advisory Committee, and staff put into, one, creating the structure for these rates and the methodology behind the rates, ultimately making sure that they were rates that are compatible with our local community, with our local ratepayers. Tonight, I think you're going to hear another side of the story that's really important to our utility rates, and in particular, that's how affordable are utilities for our citizens. So Ms. Cardozosa, our Finance Director, is going to present tonight on our affordability index, which illustrates where some of the utility rates that are being proposed for this evening actually impact our citizens and where they stand as compared to comparable jurisdictions around the region.
Thank you.
Great, thank you, Nathan, and good evening, Council. So as Nathan mentioned, tonight we're just going to give you a brief update on what our affordability index looks like with some of our comparable cities. This is a pretty important process for the utility rate adoption because it shows us what's affordable for our citizens. Tonight we're really going to be focusing more on the utilities because we just went through the housing needs assessment, and so we're really just going to be looking at the utilities and then overall costs as they're related to household costs and income. So the purpose of this index is just to determine the affordability of Port Angeles utilities as they compare in terms of employment rate, housing costs, and median income for other comparable cities, which we'll get to in a moment. The last time this index was updated was in 2014, so it's been about 5 years. And the information is gathered from the U.S. Census, the County Assessor's Office, the Department of Revenue, and then there was quite a bit of research that was conducted by the Finance Department calling other cities, counties, PDs, to determine some of those rates and other information needed. And so in all cases, the utilities have been calculated on the same amount of usage, and this was really what was determined when we were looking at all the cities, and this just kind of seemed to be an average amongst all of the comparables. So that's 2,977 kilowatts per hour and 1,143 cubic yards of water. So the criteria that we used for determining comparable cities is that they needed to have a population size within 20% of Port Angeles. We compared population density to find cities that were closely related density-wise to Port Angeles. They needed to have a permit requirement for the National Pollution Discharge Elimination System, or an NPDES permit for stormwater, and their location needed to be west of the Cascades. So the comparable cities, there's 15 in total, 16 if you count Port Angeles. So it's Aberdeen, Anacortes, Arlington, Battleground, Bonnie Lake, Camas, Centralia, Covington, Kenmore, Mill Creek, Monroe, Nicoletio, Oak Harbor, Tukwila, and Tumwater. And so I just wanted to note that this criteria and the cities that we're using for comparison are the same as they were in 2014. We looked at the criteria and at the cities, and we determined that they were still relevant to what we were trying to present. So I'm just going to start off with some statistics about our area. So our unemployment rates, these were grabbed from the U.S. Census, and they're city-specific, not county or regional. And so because of that, the U.S. Census for cities, the last time they updated that was in 2017. So all the next 3 slides you're going to see are from 2017. I know the regional unemployment rate is a little bit lower now than is what presented here, so I just wanted to make note of that. So comparing those 15 cities to Port Angeles, we have the highest unemployment rate at the end of 2017 at 9%. The percent of the population that's receiving public assistance, we're kind of in an average, kind of medium area there at 12.3%. And then just kind of drilling down a little bit, the population using food stamps, we're a little bit high compared to some of the other cities at 8.6%. So looking at our median household income, we are the third lowest in our comparable cities for median income. That's $41,297. The Washington average is $59,374, so that just compares us to Washington State as a whole. And again, we're the fourth lowest in terms of our comparable cities. So drilling down and looking at utility rates, I'm just going to compare each of the utilities based on those cities. But this is a monthly cost. These aren't yearly costs right here, so per month. And you'll notice that there are two rates there for Port Angeles. One is the proposed rates that we've been talking about at the last council meeting and going through with the methodologies, and the other is where the rates currently are, so you can see where they compare. The one in blue is the current rate, and the one in green is the proposed. So for electric utility, we're actually one of the lowest cities. If the proposed rates were to move forward, we would actually be the lowest city in terms of electric utility rates. In the water utility comparison, we're directly the opposite. So we have the highest utility rate for water consumption, and the proposed rate would be the same.
Is that just for the water utility, or is that including wastewater?
That's just water.
Thanks.
So looking at the wastewater utility, our current rates were about the fourth highest, but looking at what we're proposing, it would actually put us fourth lowest. So it goes from one end to the other. Looking at solid waste, we're about average, and that would be the same looking at the proposed rates. And same with yard waste, we're right there at average. A little bit on the low end currently, but there are a lot of cities, as you can see, that they don't charge for yard waste. Stormwater, we're in the high area, we're the third highest for stormwater rates. And there's a little bit of an increase there for proposed, but it's really not much, about 20 cents. So looking at utility bills in total, so this is the monthly cost of a utility bill. You can see that Port Angeles currently, we're kind of on that average to low spectrum. Looking at the proposed rates, that would put us the fourth lowest for total utility bill. And so what does this look like to, as far as an annual cost for a homeowner? So we took housing costs, which is the purple bar. The kind of peach orange color is property tax. Utilities are the dark gray, and the green is the retail sales tax. And so you can see Port Angeles is kind of towards the end of the spectrum there. We are amongst the lowest, or the third lowest, regardless of whether we're looking at proposed rates or current rates. So current is right here, $15,970, and that's a yearly total. Proposed is $15,755, so it's about $215 difference on our proposed rates per year. And again, that we are the third lowest in terms of overall costs for a household per year. However, if you recall from one of our first slides, our median income is one of the lowest. So when you compare how much it costs per annual household, and you look at the cost for your median income yearly, Port Angeles is actually the third highest in terms of costs per median income. So the conclusion here is that as a whole, utility rates for Port Angeles are low compared to cities our size and comparisons. About 8.9% lower overall in utility rates. Average household costs are 35.8% lower than average comparable cities. But the median income level is 41.8% lower than the average comparable city to Port Angeles. And so this can be particularly problematic when we look at large-scale utility projects, operating costs for utilities. Our utilities still require the same amount of maintenance and operations as utilities in other areas. And so just looking at our system's ability to afford those rates, really what we're looking at is a lack of family wage jobs that will increase median household income. That's really where the disconnect is. Our utility rates are actually really pretty low in comparison to cities. They're similar to us. So as far as the affordability index goes, this is what I have for you. If you have any questions, I would be happy to answer them now. Otherwise, I'll move right into some of the changes that we have on the ordinances for the rate adoption. Okay.
Well, I think people here look more at, okay, well, what's the cost of utilities in the city compared to all those services if you're not in the city? I know that's a different study than what you just presented. I really appreciate this study, but that's also a question. I feel like, a ratepayer in Port Angeles is saying, oh, somebody else lives in the county, what are they paying? How does that compare? And so that's, I think, an outstanding question that is important for us here, notwithstanding the value of this study. So thank you so much for this.
Yeah, you're welcome. And I just wanted to comment a little bit on that as well, that there aren't many cities that have a full range of utilities. And so in looking at these, we're really the only one that has an electric utility, for example. And so they're using like PDs for that. So there's a little bit that we can compare to counties by just looking at this. And then, of course, you have to take into consideration debt and utility project requirements when you're looking at these as well, because those will vary by PDs and cities.
And so compared to those other cities, we're actually getting a fairly remarkable bang for our buck with our electric utility, as we have fairly high service levels.
Yes.
It just seems like the water cost is probably connected to the dams coming down in the last decade, is the part that is a struggle for us specifically.
Yes, yeah. And some of that is contributed to capital projects as well.
Right.
Okay. Should we move on to the other part of your presentation?
Sure. So changes since the first reading that we've had to some of the ordinances are an update to the electric ordinance to include non-taxable rates. Those were not included the last time, and so we've done that calculation, and those are in there now. The rates for the transportation specifically were rounded to the nearest hundredth decimals, the nearest 2 decimal points, and that is because the software that the transfer station uses cannot run a calculation on anything more than that. So stormwater, we just wanted to mention, it wasn't very well explained at the first reading, the staff recommendation for changing the ERUs in the phase-out plan. So the recommendation that we had was moving to 15 ERUs in 2020, and that would affect about 36% of the customers. And so the reason we did that is because there's really some natural breaks in there. So about a third of the customers.
Can you explain what an ERU is for everyone here?
It's a residential unit. It's based on 3,000 square feet. So the proposal would be in 2022 to move from 15 to 30 ERUs, and that would affect another 30% of the customers. And then in 2024, move to 100 ERUs that would affect 26%, an additional 26% of the customers. And then a final phase out in 2026, which would be the remaining 8% of the customers. And then the last change since the first reading is the Medic 1 ordinance was updated to correct an error in call log. So that was the calculations. We run those on the number of calls per grouping. And so we had an error in there. So the assisted living and 24-hour nursing rates were changed, and that affected other rates as well. And also on both of those, assisted living and 24-hour nursing, we had agreed to a 5-year phase-in on the increase for them 3 years ago when we adopted rates. And so they will project yearly rates rather than the average for the 3 years so that we can continue to do that for them. Okay, that is all I have for you. Any questions for me?
Any questions?
Can you just go back 2 slides and leave it there, so that, because I'm sure we're going to want to talk about that one later.
Sure.
Okay. Any questions right now?
Yeah, so if I understand the data at the bottom there, that's 15, or 36% of the customers have below 15 ERUs. An additional 30% have between 15 and 30, et cetera. Is that what that's saying?
So 36% of customers would be affected by moving from 10 ERUs to 15 ERUs.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and then 30% would be affected by moving 15. In other words, 30% have between 15 and 30.
Yes, that's correct.
So this is proposing to phase out in, a change in 2020, a change in 2024, a change in 2020, change in 2022, a change in 2024, and a change in 2026. Why not scale it up every single year so that the customer blocks aren't feeling a jump in every 2 years? I guess is my question.
Because we are proposing 2-year rates. And so it was just the natural way that it would work out.
Any other questions? All right, thank you very much. Do we still want to leave this slide up?
I just know the stormwater was one of
Okay.
our discussion points.
We can always turn it off in
Quite
a little
bit
bit.
the last couple of meetings.
So tonight we are asking for continuation of the public hearing from
Yes.
October 1st.
Okay.
So council, if I can just add to that, I think an important distinction is that you do have two ordinances in front of you, recognizing that the UAC did recommend moving forward with 30 ERUs this year, and recognizing that staff had recommended 15 ERUs. So I just want to clarify that distinction, that you have two ordinances before you, or two options to that for you this evening. Director Carrizosa can correct me if I have that wrong.
No, that is correct.
Okay.
So I just didn't know if you wanted to do the public hearing or if you wanted us to talk about this.
Let's do the public hearing, and then we'll have our conversation.
Deal.
Okay, so I'm not going to use the gavel. If you are here and would like to speak to the proposed utility rates, this is the continuation of the public hearing, which we started last meeting. So feel free to come forward, same application for this one, name and whether you live in the city. Don't everyone jump at once. All right, well, seeing no one, I'm going to use the gavel now to close the public hearing. That was so quiet. There we go. Might as well use it while I have it. Okay, so I'm going to do the second reading, and then we can have council discussion. So we have a number here today. An ordinance of the City of Port Angeles, Washington, amending section chapter 13.12 of the Port Angeles Municipal Code relating to electric utility rates. An ordinance of the City of Port Angeles, Washington, amending sections chapter 13.20 of the Port Angeles Municipal Code relating to utility discounts. An ordinance of the City of Port Angeles, Washington, amending sections of chapter 13.44 of the Port Angeles Municipal Code relating to water rates. An ordinance of the City of Port Angeles, Washington, amending sections chapter 13.54 of the Port Angeles Municipal Code relating to garbage collection. An ordinance of the City of Port Angeles, Washington, amending sections 13.57 of the Port Angeles Municipal Code relating to solid waste processing facility rates. An ordinance of the City of Port Angeles, Washington, amending sections of chapter 13.63 of the Port Angeles Municipal Code relating to stormwater utility and regulations. Version 1 and version 2 are included here tonight. An ordinance of the City of Port Angeles, Washington, amending sections of chapter 13.65 of the Port Angeles Municipal Code relating to wastewater service rates. An ordinance of the City of Port Angeles, Washington, amending sections of chapter 13.73 of the Port Angeles Municipal Code relating to ambulance service and Medic 1 rates. And before we start our discussion, I just want to articulate that when we get to a point where someone wants to make a motion for adoption, we can deal with them individually, or someone could make a summary motion. But if that's the case, we need to have in that summary motion a statement of whether whether the motion is for version 1 of the stormwater utility or version 2. So.
Can you clarify, is version 1 the 15
yes, I will
or
do
the
that.
30?
Dun, dun, dun. Just a moment. Got my tables here.
Looks like version 2 is the 30.
Yes, version 1, thank you. Version 1 is the 15 ERUs and version 2 is the 30 ERUs.
So I will go ahead and make a motion to adopt all of those ordinance, and in regard to the two versions of the stormwater utility, adopt version 1 of the proposed ordinances.
Which is the staff recommendation version?
Which is the 15 ERU staff recommendation.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion on the table and a second. Is there any discussion?
So at our last meeting, we did have a lot of discussion about the equivalent residential units and whether or not how we should phase it out. And I think that what staff has proposed is reasonable, provides a more stable picture to those somewhat few customers of how their rates will increase, and does get us to the policy outcome that we want, which is to stop having our residential utility customers subsidize the large people that own large property amounts that have impervious surface. So I'll support that.
Anyone else want to speak to the motion? All right, hearing no discussion, we have a motion on the table and a second to adopt the ordinances as read with version 1 of chapter 13.63 for stormwater utility and regulations. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed?
No.
Okay, motion passes. Okay, let me find my agenda. I tucked it in here somewhere. We will now move on to item F2, 2020 budget revenue sources presentation, and I believe we're going to hear from finance again. Oh, there you are already.
Yep. Good evening again. So I'm just going to pull up my presentation here. And tonight we are going to be talking about the 2020 revenue sources. So it's a little bit of a continuation of what we were just discussing, but instead of just looking at revenue sources for utilities, we'll be looking at citywide revenues. Okay, so this revenue sources presentation and the public hearing that will follow is a state requirement for RCW 8455-120. And basically it just says that we must hold a public hearing regarding the revenues that we included in the next year's budget. And within that, we need to include a consideration of whether or not we will be having property tax increases. And so this is kind of a one-time thing. There's no action that needs to follow. There's no continuation of the public hearing. It's just an opportunity for residents to give their input on revenue sources in the budget. And since we're talking about requirements, I just wanted to mention another requirement that was complete on October 11th. That was this Friday, and that was the preliminary budget document for 2020 was posted to the city website and distributed. And so anybody that would like to peruse that, it is available now. Okay, so looking at citywide revenue, the city does plan in 2020 to have $127,391,600 in total revenue for the entire city. And so just looking at some of the changes from 2019 to 2020, if we look at taxes up here, those are primarily taxes that we see in the general fund, so the big taxes, property, sales tax, and utility taxes. And we'll get to those in a little bit more detail in the general fund, so I'm not going to spend too much time on them. Licenses and permits, you'll see there's a little bit of a decrease. That's because we did plan for 2019 some pretty large-scale projects that would require permits, and we aren't planning for those to continue to 2020, and so those have been removed. For our intergovernmental revenue, those are related to largely grants and conservation incentives, and so there are some grants that we're just not going to be receiving, and that's the cause of the big decrease there. In our charges for goods and services, that's what we just approved, things like utility rates and allocations. And so the increase there is primarily attributed to the electric. We do plan to have McKinley up and running for a full year, and so there's a large increase there for that. And looking at our miscellaneous revenue, the large increase is $2.5 million that is expected in the water fund as part of the settlement agreement for the Elma facility. So that has been in the federal budget, and so we did plan for it. And then looking down at our other financing services, sources, that decrease there, those are transfers for capital. And so if you recall, we had a really large transfer from the electric department this year into capital for the lighthouse building that won't be happening in 2020. So that's what we're seeing there. And then for reserves used, we include it on here so we can show how we balance the budget, but reserves used really aren't considered a revenue source. And typically what we see with reserves used are for capital projects. So we're pulling them in and out of reserves as we make those transfers from utilities. We let them build up, and then as a new big project, they come out. And so what that means is we have a lot of capital projects coming up in 2020. Okay, so just looking at just 2020, you can see that charges for goods and services make up roughly 57% of all of the citywide revenues. followed by taxes at 12.24% and miscellaneous revenue at 10.17%. So looking at your charges for goods and services, of that 57%, 40%, about 41%, is just from the electric utility, followed by solid waste with 16.2%, and then wastewater, water, stormwater, Medic 1. And then if we look at internal charges, those are allocations, and so those are payments to other funds for services that are provided by them. And that's 6.3% of the entire city budget is for allocations. Looking at taxes, primarily this is in the general fund, so I'm not going to spend too much time on that, but they are, the main ones are property sales and utility tax. Those are kind of the big three taxes right there. So I'm going to move right into the general fund. So the general fund really is the main operating fund for the city. It accounts for your typical city services that you would expect, like parks and recreation, fire, police, and then all the internal services like legal and finance, community economic development. And so looking at the revenue here, the general fund is unique in that a lot of the revenue collected, particularly for tax revenue, can be used for any purpose. In other funds and other areas, these revenues are restricted, so they can't be used for just anything. You can't take money out of the electric fund and use it in the general fund. However, the general fund can transfer money to any other fund if council decided to do so. So that's just one thing that makes it unique. And also the reason it's the main operating fund for the city. So there again, looking at the taxes, I will get into those in quite a bit of detail here in the next slide, but I just wanted to go over licenses and permits. You'll see it's the same amount of the decrease that's on citywide because it's for the building permits. And the increase here on charges for goods and services, that is the allocations or charges to other funds. And then down here, the $50,000, that is for facade grants. So we are planning a transfer. We do that every other year, and so for 2020, we're planning $50,000 to go to the general fund for those. Okay, so just looking at 2020 in the general fund, a very different picture than what you see citywide. 66.3% of the entire general fund is taxes. The three main taxes, the utility taxes, the sales tax, and the property tax, make up about roughly 85 to 90% of that. And then the charges for goods and services, about 89% is allocations or charges from other funds for the services provided by the general fund. So a good example of that would be our customer service departments. They do all the billing for utilities, and they also take in all the payments for the utilities. And so we allocate them to the various utilities that they support. Okay, so looking at taxes, that's 66%. Property tax makes up 34% of that, utility tax is 32%, and sales tax makes up 27% of that. So those are your main items right there. All of those taxes can be used for any purpose. They're not restricted in any way. Also within that taxes category is criminal justice tax, that's 2%. It is restricted for use for the police department only. And then we have our telephone tax, makes up 3% of that, that is unrestricted. And then other taxes make up 2%. These are pretty minor taxes, things like leasehold excise taxes and whatnot. Usually those are unrestricted as well. So looking at property tax, for 2020, we are proposing a 1% increase. That is the maximum that we are allowed to increase in any given year. And we can also collect new construction. So we are asking for the full amount for new construction and the 1%, and that's what's included in the budget. We will have another public hearing on that on November 6th as we discuss the levy rates. And so I'm not going to spend too much time on that other than to note that we are planning for the 1% increase. Okay, looking at utility tax. The utility tax that's collected is really driven by what's happening in each utility. So as we changed all those methodologies, so too does our utility tax, because it's based on the amount of revenue that we collect from them. And so that's why you see a little bit of fluctuation going on there amongst all those utilities. Of note is the electric utility is down 6.1%, which may seem a little odd since I just told you that they're expected to have quite a bit of revenue increase because we are anticipating the McKinley Mill startup. But in the general fund for the transfer for utility tax, we did not include revenue from the McKinley paper mill. And the reason why is because we're reducing our dependence on any one individual revenue source. And so it hasn't been included except for $62,000 that we're using for code enforcement. So that is the revenue source that we're using for that program in 2020.
So my question would be, when the startup is completed and we have a revenue source from McKinley, where will we be allotting that? That'll come into the electric utility then?
It will still come into the electric utility. They're still required to pay the tax on it. We're just not budgeting for it. So what would happen is it would go into reserves and we could then use them for one-time capital projects.
All right, thank you.
So utility taxes are charged a certain percentage of all the revenues that go in each utility. So all the revenues they collect, a certain percentage goes into general funds for taxes. And so electric, that's 6%, and that is set by the state. The remaining percentages are set by city council. So that's 10% each for water, wastewater, and solid waste collections, and 8% for solid waste transfer station and stormwater. Okay, so sales tax. City sales tax rate is 8.7%. Of that, the city gets roughly 0.84% for general purposes. So it says 1% here. What happens is that the county, for administration purposes, they get 0.15%, and the state keeps 0.01% of that. So the city receives 0.84% of sales tax. We also receive 0.1% of criminal justice tax that goes into the police department for their use. The emergency communications goes into PENCOM. That is actually a countywide tax that's administered by the county and then passed through to us. And then we have our transportation benefit district, that's 0.2%. That goes straight into the transportation benefit district fund. So the amount that goes in the general fund is at 0.84%. Okay, so looking at sales tax by category, you can see that over the last 5 years, retail trade, accommodation, and food services have grown pretty drastically, and that's all sustainable growth. Construction has also grown, but when we're factoring the amount that we're going to increase for sales tax, we do not include one-time projects in there. So we strip that out and we look at sustainable growth, and that's the amount that we put into the budget. I did want to also note the blue line here is other services. And so you may recall that about 1.5 years ago, the Supreme Court looked at a case regarding online sales tax and whether or not they needed to be paid in states, and it was determined that they do. And so we're starting to see quite a bit come in for that. I think just for this year, and looking at the numbers, it was around $60,000. And so we have included an increase in the budget for that. So that's good news. Okay, so looking at permits, that 3% is made up of building permits, that's 34%, police permits at 32%, public works and utilities is 27%, and then we have a cable franchise fee that fits into this category according to the way that we do our accounting standards, and that's 3%, and then other permits in various different departments, fire would be an example, is 3%. So intergovernmental revenues are really what we call state shared revenues or grants. And so each year the state says we have this pot of money and we're going to split it up based on population size. And so they determine a dollar amount per each individual in the city, and that's how we determine how much revenue we get. So high crime would be a good example of that. They take a certain amount that they get for cases and restitution, and that they have sitting in a fund at the state, and they base it on a percentage of your population, and then another percentage of the amount of crime that you've had in your city, and that determines how much revenue you get from the state for that. So that's just one example. City assistance, the city is expecting to get 10% of the overall intergovernmental amount in city assistance. So basically what it is if you meet certain criterias with your streets, then they will give you a certain portion of state revenue. And then 32% of that is for grants. And so some examples include the COPS grants, Stone Garden grants, those pay for some of the overtime for our police officers. Okay, charges for services. So as I mentioned, fund charges, those are the allocations to other departments and other funds for services within the general fund. That's 89% of the 25% of the charges for services. Rental fees, so those would include Parks and Rec, people renting out Burton, for example, that's in the rental fees. Planning fees, and then cemetery services. And then this is just an overview of some of the main revenues within the city general fund. And then the percent of the 2020 budget over on this right-hand side here. So You can see property tax for the total general fund makes up 22.8%, sales tax 17.6%, and have your various utility taxes each listed out there. But I also want to point out that allocations make up 22.4% of the entire general fund revenue, so about a quarter of that. Okay, so general fund revenue is it's just showing 2020 and kind of shows you how significant some of those revenue sources are, especially those three main taxes and the intergovernmental charges. All right, so we're going to move into special revenue funds. So essentially, these are funds that receive a revenue that can only be used for a specific purpose. And so primarily the three main funds here are lodging tax, streets, real estate excise tax 1 and 2, and PENCOM. So looking at lodging tax, we're expecting $702,300. That's a $54,000 increase from 2019. And then we're expecting a small increase on our investment earnings. Looking at our street funds, the street fund is a special revenue fund because it receives motor vehicle fuel excise tax. That's a state shared revenue, and again, it's based on population. And it is expected to decrease a little bit. That's been kind of a fluctuating number with the state for a few years now. And so you can see in 2018, we over-collected what their estimate was by quite a bit, but we can't enter more than what the state anticipates they'll be sending to us. So there's a little bit of a decrease. You'll also notice that street-related transfers is going up $81,800 for next year. And basically what that is a transfer from the general fund to make sure that the street department isn't using any reserves when they're balancing their budget. So we increased that $81,800. $40,000 of that was for a project for ADA transition plan, which we'll talk about when we start doing the budget meeting on expenditures next week. Okay, so looking at the PENCOM funds, so we get 0.1% of sales tax countywide. That's not specific to the city. We get that for the whole county, and it's passed through from the county to us. And so we're anticipating a pretty large increase for next year of about 6%. We noticed maybe a couple of years ago that this sales tax for this was growing at a really large rate, much higher than we expected. And so we've been pretty conservative, but we felt like this year we could make that a little bit of an extra increase to it. The 911 phone tax, that's the additional tax. I don't know if you've ever seen it on your phone bill, it's the 911 tax. That's what that is. And in 2020, or 2019, we had $711,000 in there. We're projecting quite a bit of a decrease for 2020, and that's because in working with the county, we changed the way that they send those revenues to us. And what we found out was they were holding the revenues and sending them to us when they could make the budget rather than sending the amount that they actually had. So we adjusted that so that it is a little bit more appropriate. We were billing and they were sending to us, and so we're not billing them anymore. They're just sending us whatever they get every month. And then capital tax is reimbursed. And so we do not receive that revenue unless we have capital expenditures. And so in the 2020 budget, we're not anticipating as many capital expenditures at PENCOM, which is why that revenue is decreasing. And so just graphically looking at the PENCOM fund, you can just kind of see the way that the revenues have changed. And so the green and the gray lines, those are budget numbers, and so that's why you kind of see them change a little bit. I did want to mention on user fees, you'll see they stay exactly the same. And so for 2020, we're proposing that there would be no increase to those user fees over 2019. And that's because we had a really large amount of savings due to personnel shortages in the PENCOM funds. And so we're crediting back to those user agencies rather than putting them into reserves and watching that grow. We're giving that back to them in the form of keeping our user fees the same. So looking at real estate excise tax, this is each one of these. There's REIT 1 and REIT 2. They are restricted. They're pretty specific on what we can use them for, and they do vary between 1 and 2. And we're expecting $247,500 for each. This is 0.25% tax that's on all the real estate that's sold in the city. And so that's where that comes from. And then we also do collect investment earnings as well in these funds. So there's some other special revenue funds I didn't list here because they're not major, but I I did want to mention them because they are a source of revenue in the city, and one is the Business Improvement Area Fund. So this is an assessment that's collected from downtown businesses. We're expecting $36,800 in revenues in 2020. We also have the Port Angeles Housing Rehabilitation Fund. So these primarily are community development block grants or CDBG grants that come into the city, and then we pass them through. In 2020, we are only expecting revenues from the repayment of housing rehabilitation loans. And so we're expecting about $43,800 total revenues in 2020 for that. And then we have our code compliance fund. This is really the Blight Properties Fund. And in 2018, there was a general fund transfer for startup. So it'll look like there's a pretty significant decrease. That was $50,000. But in 2020, the only revenues we're expecting at this time is $1,000 in investment earnings. Okay, so looking at enterprise funds, that's what we just went over in a lot of detail this year, looking at all the methodologies and the amount of revenue that we need to support our utilities. And so we're going to talk about each of the main utilities, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on them because we've gone over them in so much detail. But I do want to point out that within each of these, there are some non-rate revenues. So for example, in the electric department, they get revenues from electrical permits and pole rentals. And they also get quite a bit from investment earnings. And then one other thing that I did want to mention is this right here, the judgments and settlements. So this was a credit that we used to get from BPA that ended in October of this year. So we're not anticipating that for next year.
That was a big one.
It is a big one. Okay, so that just kind of looks at a graphically a 10-year period. So you can kind of see when it started to dip, that was really when the mill went from 2 machines to 1 and then shut down, and then they're ramping back up. So you can kind of see what happens there with that dip. And then looking at the water fund, again, all of these are completely affected by the methodology. So you're going to see some changes in each, some will go up, some will go down, and it's really based on the methodologies that were just approved and the rates that were just approved. With the exception of this $2.5 million, which I mentioned earlier, we're getting from the federal government as part of our settlement for the LWAP. And then the water department also does get investment interest as well. Okay, so the change there really is from the methodology. Looking at the wastewater fund, very similar. One of the other revenue sources that they have here is a $98,000 Department of Ecology grant. And this supports one of the positions that we have in wastewater for our pollution prevention specialist. And so you can see that 10-year change there. And then looking at solid waste, they also have some investment interest that they collect in addition to just the rates that we have that we just approved. So you can see the changes there in the transfer station over the last roughly about 5 years. And so we chose 2014 for the comparison because that's when the landfill stabilization project took effect. And I did want to mention there on the transfer station, the dip that you see in 2019, that's because we eliminated the surcharge there as part of the rates. So in solid waste collections, you can see the changes there. Again, it's all based on rates and consumption. And then looking at stormwater, the miscellaneous revenue is primarily for things like permits, but there's also for other financing sources. They're expecting in 2020 a grant to help with some of the new mandates that are coming out for stormwater permitting. So looking at Medic One, you might recall in 2019 we put a new revenue source in here for GEMT, that's Ground Emergency Medical Transport. And right now for 2019 we're playing a little bit of catch up. So we're getting revenue in for 2017, we're getting revenue in for 2018, and then they're catching us up for 2019. And that just has to do with the timing of when the payments are coming in. Not really anything that the city can do except for kind of be in a hurry up and wait moment for it. But in 2020, we are expecting $210,000 for GEMT. But what we've done is we've separated that out because now going forward, it's still a revenue source we're going to get, but it's going to be collected as part of ambulance services. So it's really in there, but we're splitting it out so you can see what that new revenue source is giving us above and beyond that. So the corresponding offset here is in recurring transfers. So that's a transfer from the general funds to support the Medic One utility. And as we see our GEMT rates go up, the recurring transfer goes down to help with that.
And then eventually the GMT will stabilize? Once we're done catching up?
Yeah, so we're expecting, anywhere from 180 to 200,000 to continue to be a more stable number. For 2019, we've exceeded that already. But that's because we're catching up on 3 years almost, yeah. Okay, so that's just looking at Medic 1. So you'll see in 2016, going into 2016 and 17, a pretty big increase. That was the approval for additional firefighters and the increase to the Medic 1 fee. And then there is one other enterprise fund that I didn't mention here, and that's our harbor cleanup funds. So the revenues received here are reimbursements from our insurance companies. And then in 2020, we have a $400,000 grant that's expected for expenses that are not covered by our insurance company. Okay, looking at our capital funds, I'm just going to really be talking about one, that's our transportation benefit district. All the other capital funds receive transfers for revenues, and so they're coming from their collected utilities, they're coming from the general fund, from REIT, from lodging tax, and that's really what's supporting them. Sometimes they will also get grants, but the transportation benefit district is different because it receives that 0.2% of sales tax, and so we are projecting about a 4% increase in 2020. We're still kind of working out actuals and whether when we first put in the budget, whether that was an accurate number, and we're pretty close. So it's a little bit higher than what you see for the basic sales tax, but not by a lot, by about 0.2%. We are expecting $200,000 in grants, and then about $300,000 in transfers from REIT and general fund. Okay, and then as I mentioned, there are other capital funds, such as utilities and the governmental capital funds for projects. And again, those primarily come from transfers. Okay, so looking at other funds, I'm going to go over these pretty quickly because these are pretty restricted. We have our fireman's pension fund. So revenues right now include investment interest only. And the reason is the fire premium tax that was previously in the budget under fireman's pension was moved into general fund because we had a new accounting rule that all medical premiums for fireman's pension had to be paid out of the general fund. So we moved that tax in there to offset those costs. The cemetery endowment fund is also only receiving interest revenue from the sales at Ocean View Cemetery that were prior to 1981. And so we cannot use any of those revenues until the cemetery reaches its full capacity. So those funds just collect interest every year until that happens. Our debt service funds, again, interest-only revenue, and that's on 3 government obligation bonds, so our LTGO bonds that we have. And our internal service funds, so equipment services and IT. The revenues that we collect for those funds are for charges or allocations. So we're taking staff time and expenditures and we're charging them to other departments as they're being used. And we have a methodology and a formula that we use for that. And then our self-insurance fund, the revenues consist of transfers for employee portion and employer portions for medical premiums. Okay, so I tried to get through that as quickly as possible. I know it's a lot of information, but that is everything that we have included in the 2020 budget for revenues. I just wanted to do a reminder of the budget schedule here at the end. So October 22nd, we're planning our 2020 preliminary budget work session. That's primarily going to focus on expenditures. November 6th, we'll have the 2020 property tax presentation, the public hearing and the first reading of that ordinance. And again, that's for setting the levy rates. And then November 19th, that'll be the second public hearing and adoption of the property tax ordinance. And then that same night, we'll have the 2020 budget presentation, first public hearing and reading. And then on December 3rd, we'll be bringing the budget back for the second public hearing and hopefully the adoption. So that's all I have. So I'm available for any questions that you may have.
No questions from council right now? Oh, Mike, you have one? No? Okay.
Just generally, we have a positive outlook for 2020.
Yes.
Because our tourism tax the last 3 years have been gangbusters, and I'm sure this year will come, be the same. And so businesses, construction's going on, retail businesses seem to be busy, and I think it looks very positive for 2020.
Yes, it really does. And so in the 2020 budget, the only revenues or only reserves we're planning to use are for capital projects. We're not using reserves to sustain any of the budgets.
Super. Thank you.
Yes.
I'm sure I'll have more questions when we do our budget work session.
Lots more time for these.
But I'd just like to also point out that that 1% property tax increase is one of our financial policies.
It is. Mhm.
All right. Lindsay has a...
As a point of clarification there, you mean one of ours or one of the states?
Ours.
Okay.
Yes, it's in the city financial policies.
Based on state rules about what we can do.
Right, it's our financial policy based on state law.
It says it will take the maximum 1% increase each year.
Yes, okay, gotcha. Yeah. It's, I think this challenge, and this maybe precedes the discussion next week, but you're talking about the general fund paying mostly salaries, particularly police and fire salaries, having a structural limitation that about a quarter of it can increase by only 1% a year.
Yes.
So how do we reconcile that?
We look at other revenue sources, and we're really limited on the property tax. There's nothing we can do about that 1%. It equates to about $50,000. So in retrospect, in 2019, the CPI index came back at 3.1% for salary increases, and we're limited to a quarter of our revenue in the general fund coming back at 1%. So it's a big gap.
I mean, just to answer your question, I think that the strategies that we employ are encourage new construction, because that's something that we can get property tax increases from. So we're going to be talking about that in our next public hearing. Encourage sales tax collection by, with a vibrant tourist economy, which I think that we are. So, I mean, I think there are strategies to get that, that nexus of, as you're talking about, our costs are going up at a rates higher than that 1% alone can handle. But I do think there are strategies that we have been employing that attack that.
Yes, and for example, since you brought up the sales tax, we're projecting a 3.9% increase. That's all sustainable, and we're starting to see sales tax get back to levels where they were prior to the recession, which is pretty exciting for us because it's taking a long time for us to get there.
Yeah, but we also know sales tax can be cyclical, and so
yes, which is
it's
why
getting
we're
back
conservative
to
with that
top.
as well. Yeah.
Okay. We have another part of this, which is to open a public hearing, so I will do that now. If anyone would like to come and speak to the revenue sources that were just presented. And just state your name and whether you reside in the city, please.
Matt Jordan, I reside in Port Angeles. So I noticed on the budget that $7,000 a year in fines are currently allocated. I'd like to propose that the city adopt a code enforcement officer. As a local business owner and realtor, I believe that the city can do much better in assessing fines towards things like mattresses left out in people's front yards and cars that are leaking oil with slashed tires. If we could somehow get some money for some of that, I think that it would serve two purposes. It would bring money into the city and also beautify the city at the same time. So that would in turn draw tourism and more business, and that's all I have to say about that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, we are. All right,
Anyone else? All right, I will close the public hearing. Which brings us to our next public hearing. I was gonna do that after this one. I was gonna do this and then, just for timing purposes. Okay. We'll do a 5-minute break and then come back for the next public hearing. All right. So next up on the agenda is our third public hearing for tonight, which is the proposed municipal code amendments to increase residential building capacity and housing diversity. So it looks like we have a presentation.
I'm actually going to just introduce
yes.
our staff
okay, thank
members.
You.
So, good evening.
Good evening.
Wow,
I was about to turn it over to you, so thank you.
Awake. So I just want to give a quick summary of what we're looking at today. City staff is recommending municipal code amendments to Title 17 to help increase residential building capacity and allow more diversity of housing stock within the city's jurisdictional boundaries. The proposed amendments are in accordance with the city's housing action plan, specifically portions of task 2 of the plan. Additionally, the amendments are in alignment of what the state of Washington is encouraging with the recent passing of House Bill 1923. So tonight, because we do have a public hearing, I have my associate planner, Ben Roderick, here, and he's going to go through in a presentation just summarizing not only how we got here, the process that has been taken so far, and then a summary of the changes proposed.
Thank you. All right. Are you ready?
Yeah, could I get the presentation? All right, good evening.
Good evening.
I'm going to go over the background for how we got here, go over each individual chapter and the changes that have been made, and also some of the changes since our planning commission public hearing. And then I have a couple of short examples to give you just to show kind of what we're trying to accomplish with these changes. So this kind of all started in late 2018 with our housing needs assessment kickoff and our community-wide survey that was provided for each individual household. We all got one. In January of 2019, you passed a strategic plan for 2019-2020, and these changes, housing needs assessment, those sorts of things, were all part of that strategic plan. In June 2019, we adopted the housing needs assessment and the action plan as part of our 2019 comprehensive plan amendment. And work began immediately on these code changes. We started basically with planning commission doing work sessions, a lot of education sessions going through planning enabling code, the revised code of Washington, and just building up into how we can accomplish some of these changes and amendments to our code to allow for increased infill density and those sorts of things with housing. So on September 25th, we had our first and only public hearing for Planning Commission, and the Planning Commission made 2 motions. Their first motion was to recommend that the de minimis variance be increased from 2% to 5%. That variance allows for a change in lot size. So we saw that sometimes when some of our community members are trying to subdivide land, the land might not be exactly 14,000 to allow for that minimum lot size. So that allows for a little bit of variance there at the director's discretion. And their second motion was to recommend approval of Municipal Code Amendment number 1967 with the understanding that staff will make the language consistent throughout. There were just some small variations and changes that needed to be addressed before it came to you. So our public noticing procedures, September 9th, the public meeting notice was published in the Peninsula Daily News. On the 11th, it was posted within City Hall, and on the 12th, it was also posted on the city's website. And that was notice for both public hearings for Planning Commission and this public hearing we're having tonight. Our SEQA noticing was a combined optional process, so there was one comment period, and that was a part of the noticing in the PDN City Hall and on the website. And that comment period ended on the 25th. We did not receive any comments related directly to our SEQA noticing. So going into some of the changes in these chapters, first is our residential single family RS7. Everything in red is basically what we've changed since Planning Commission based on public comment and the Commission's recommendation. So we've changed the title of RS7 residential single family to simply R7 residential low density, taking the single family portion out. We removed unit density, so basically related to larger lots, unit density is usually used, so many units per acre. We found that it was a conflict when we were changing the minimum lot sizes with the unit density. So in these single family residential zones, we're looking towards using minimum lot size as a regulation of density instead of an overall per unit acre. Some of the changes that remained, change of duplexes as an allowed use in 7,000 square foot lots, accessory dwelling units as an allowed use outright, and some changes in area and dimensional requirements, the lowering from 7,000 to 5,000 square feet minimum lot size, lowering of the frontage requirements to 35 feet,
raising of the maximum lot coverage to 45% from 30%, and site coverage from 50 to 65, and then lowering the setback from 7 to 5 in the alley and the side. And that's just to assist in creating density and allowing for more flexibility on the site. Similar changes to RS9, changing it from residential single family to residential low density and removing the RS designation. Removal of that unit density again, something that I guess I missed. No, I did have it here, I just didn't say it. We have made it so that instead of being not applicable, the garage entry setback is placed at 20 feet to ensure that a parked car can be off-site in front of the garage. So it doesn't go over basically a sidewalk or in the right of way. So similar changes in RS9 there, with the duplex change, but minimum of that standard lot size of 9,000, accessory dwelling units as an allowed use, removal of animal husbandry and accessory use, and removal of commercial greenhouses and libraries as a conditional use, just looking at what we're trying to accomplish with residential density again. And then similar changes to area and dimensional requirements. And I can go over these individually, but I think I have some examples that will more effectively show what we're trying to accomplish with those changes. So RS11, our standard 11,000 square foot lots, again, changing the name of the chapter, removing the unit density, garage setback, but changing duplexes as a conditional use permit with a minimum of 11,000 square feet right now. Right now it's a lot and a half. So we're lowering that down to the standard lot size. But also allowing accessory dwelling units as an allowed use. Again, animal husbandry, removal as an accessory use, and removal of commercial greenhouses, libraries, and public-private schools as a conditional use. And then some changes and reductions in the dimensional requirements. So some small changes in our commercial neighborhood and our community shopping district zones. We are changing up the purpose statement to incorporate residential uses in mixed-use buildings. And then we're also proposing the allowance of existing single-family residences with the idea that a residence may be turned into an office building, but it may be able to be changed back. And a lot of these changes are based on things that we've seen in the office when people were trying to propose residential uses. So in Title 1794, our General Provisions, Conditions, and Exceptions chapter, we are including 5% de minimis variance in lot area not to be reduced. That is, there was a recommendation from the Planning Commission to raise that from 2%. And then some clerical, the bed and breakfast signage, changing the term accessory residential unit to the more universal accessory dwelling unit throughout the chapter. And we are changing the accessory dwelling unit parking standards to provide or maintain off-street parking for primary residences, and that is it.
Can you explain what that means?
Basically, at this point, we were stating that you needed to provide one parking space for the accessory dwelling unit, and we're changing that to just maintaining that you need to have correct off-street parking for the primary residence.
Great.
Removing of zoning-based vision clearance standards. Currently we have our urban service standard and guidelines has vision clearance standards for street intersections that are based on mathematics and the street type, and then we have zoning standards that are sometimes in conflict with that, mostly for fencing and those sorts of things that are based on zone, basically. So we're moving towards the engineering standards. And then also something that's come up recently, we have porches that are allowed to intrude into required yard setbacks, but we've not covered porches. So those small covered porches, those entryways, will now be able to intrude into the setback 6 feet. And then just some clarity for wall and fence requirements to make it easier for property owners to navigate through our code.
Is there a maximum on the covered porches?
What's that?
Is there a maximum on the covered porches?
It's 6 feet, yeah, 6 feet, yeah. So here's just some scenarios. The way that we see it, the most bang for your buck with some of these code changes are for if you have 3 standard lots, because the dimensional standards and the lot size requirements that we're reducing could possibly, if you have 3 lots, allow you to do different things. One is to now have the possibility of having 3 separate duplexes or a mix with duplexes, or you can subdivide into 4 lots and have just a primary residence and a possibility of an accessory dwelling unit. So that's the RS7. You can see the standard 50 by 140 lots, and the new, like, proposed changes would allow for a 37.5 foot frontage and then still 140 feet.
So in the code, we're changing to ADU, but not in our PowerPoints. I just wanted to.
Yeah, it hasn't been changed yet. In RS9, the same scenario, but the lot sizes are a little bit different. So the new minimum that we're looking towards would allow for, again, these standard lots to be split either into 3 traditionally or into 4 with our new standards, our minimum standards, with the idea that if you use the traditional method, you would be able to place duplexes on the lots, and if not, you'd still be able to place an accessory dwelling unit and a primary residence. And this is a recent short plat that came across our desk, the preliminary short plat that we approved, and this is just demonstrating a possibility. It's not exactly to scale, but I did do a little bit of math just to demonstrate that, with the traditional short plat development, you have 4 lots that are much larger in some cases than the minimum standard. And with our new regulations, we would allow for 6 lots instead of 4. Right now, it would be a long subdivision, an actual subdivision, which is a public process, but we can, change those sorts of things in the future as well. We have the ability to raise the minimum number of lots for a short plat, but it would allow for the possibility of 2 duplexes and then 4 primary residences, possibly with accessory dwelling units. And lastly, just a demonstration of our de minimis variance. It's just a lot easier to understand visually. Well, I don't think a single lot in Port Angeles is 7,000 square feet. Most of them are, a couple of % off, maybe 4 inches, so that along 140 feet equals 5 feet. So this would allow for the director to make a decision on allowing for that short plat to happen with a little bit of change in lot size. There's also situations where a house might be on the line or near the line, so the setback requirements might be breached, but you can move that line, make the lot a little bit smaller. In this case, we're proposing 5% smaller than the minimum requirement, and allow for that subdivision to still occur, even though there's an existing condition that would typically preclude it. So that's all I have for my presentation.
The visuals did help a lot.
They do.
They were really helpful.
And I just wanted to make a couple of closing comments. So we're really hoping to hear from council tonight and give us direction on any changes or that you see desired, so that we can close the public hearing tonight, but then conduct the second reading in our first meeting in November.
Okay, council, well, Mr. Broderick is still standing up there. Do we have any questions?
So were there any other duplex-specific rules in our code that are relevant? So do we have like a shared wall requirement, or?
I believe the definition of a duplex does require a shared wall.
Okay, so I'll have to just do some more research on that.
We've allowed them to have an enclosed porch that, a wall, a facial wall that connects both of them in the past. But
just a code question. So if you go from 7 down to 5, does that change the building code because those buildings are closer, or that's still not close enough to change something there?
From my understanding, it's not going to, the 5 foot is not going to require any kind of firewall changes or anything like that.
Okay.
Yeah.
I have a quick clarification question about the animal husbandry. Does that include chickens?
From my understanding of our definition of animal husbandry, nothing is specifically announced other than they can't be 3 dogs or cats or house pets, basically, outdoor pets, dogs and cats, so it could include chickens. But I think it's important to understand that pre-existing non-conforming situations exist. People already have chickens.
Right.
And then also this kind of a discussion about animal husbandry and what we want to do with it can happen in one of our larger code changes when we start to address
Sure.
things that way.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, we found that those standards really aren't the best for chickens, while they have been maybe used in the past for when people actually ask about if we have rules regarding chickens. But we feel like there could be probably better regulations developed for that.
I don't disagree.
I just would like a little clarity on the maintaining off-street parking for primary residences. So there's an ARU, ADU, and they have a couple of vehicles. I'm finding that in Port Angeles, we've had wide streets, but with people parking vehicles on both sides, more and more of our streets are becoming one lane, where you actually have to pull off to let somebody by, and so it's kind of, our streets are getting clogged. So are you saying that with the new ADUs that that they can prove that they have off-street parking?
Yeah, the criteria is based on the fact that they need to demonstrate that they're providing off-street parking for primary residents.
I appreciate that, because thank you very much.
Okay.
Can I clarify that, I guess, further? And just to clarify, too, it's not a problem for people to pull over on a side street, like a street that's serving residences and there's not an arterial. But, so you said there's parking requirement for the primary residence. Okay. I think that could be a little clearer in the write-up. It's clear from the legislative history here, but if we look at this in 5 years, it might not be. I wanted to ask about kind of the density shall not exceed 1 dwelling unit for every 9,000 square feet. This idea of being able to kind of have some lots be smaller, but then they average larger ones. Can you clarify more of the theory behind that and why that's necessary?
I think what we're trying to do in the single-family zones is take away that unit per acre requirement, because I think those requirements are best served for larger lots that are zoned in possibly RHD or RMD, where you would have many units on a single parcel. So that would provide the density requirements for units on a single parcel, whereas with these single or duplex parcels in these zones, the lower density zones, basically what we're looking at is regulating density based on minimum lot standards.
So yeah, the minimum lot standards, like table 17.11.050, provides measurements and lot setbacks and minimum lot size. So I'm asking, I guess, about the footnote. I'm not sure if it's footnote 1, but density shall not exceed 1 dwelling unit for every 9,000 square feet of lot area.
Are you looking at the ordinance or at the staff report for the planning commission? That might be the point of clarification.
I'm on page F90.
So it looks like it's actually in the ordinance.
That could be something that.
Yeah, that's actually, that part is.
Oh, no, it's the report.
Is a part of the report that went to planning commission.
And that was provided just to show the changes that we made, but it may have created some confusion.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. It seemed like we're requiring density through the minimum lot dimensions and stuff, and then we have that little passage afterward that kind of does the same thing.
Yeah, I think if you look at the ordinance, I hope that we caught that.
I should have mentioned that there was a printed copy of the proposed ordinances in front of each of you, just because we recognized that we had some pages out of order, and then one page was mistakenly missing.
So another question then is, why are we keeping the minimum lot size for duplexes? We don't have any other minimum lot size for any of the other uses. Duplexes have minimum lot size holdover from the current code, and as folks have pointed out to us, you basically need 2 lots to put a duplex on, which kind of defeats the purpose of the duplex. So why are we keeping the minimum lot size in there?
So I think the response there is really just recognizing that these are pretty significant changes to our regulations, and we feel like that we should be a little bit careful just to how much change our community can withstand. So we were really excited about the idea of bringing the minimum lot size for just a standard single family. We did discuss the idea of removing all minimum lot restrictions for duplexes, but because we don't have any other standards for duplexes in the code currently, and we didn't have any time to develop some that could work, that would be more relevant to design standards, but we felt that it was appropriate to keep a minimum lot size.
So I mean, I took that issue to the Port Angeles Realtors, and I was basically begging for some criticism of removing the minimum lot size requirement, and everyone said, no, do it. So I'd like to see that minimum lot size go away for duplexes. I also wanted to ask about the definition of apartments and see if we could lower that to 4 units.
That is something we discussed.
Yeah, that would likely also match our multi-family tax exemption section of code.
I think that's what John was hinting at in that suggestion. And then, let's see, for ADUs, I understand that there's some question about whether they're subjected to development fees. There's already development on that property, then the ADU gets added. Is that something that we can address here as we're addressing trying to make ADUs more accessible and more easy for people to develop in the city?
We were not proposing any changes to connection charges at this time.
Can we make ADUs more accessible to build in the city?
So again, I would agree with you that we should look at maybe charges holistically, not just with ADUs, but maybe compare them to other charges we're seeing, like a comparison, for example, between duplexes and ADUs, or even just differences to how charges occur to apartment complexes, but we didn't do that study with this proposal in front of you.
Okay, well, I'd like to see that in this as well as it addresses ADUs. I was wondering with the apartments and artisan manufacturing permitted uses, I guess I just highlighted to me because they changed from kind of a footnote to part of the definition. But do we need those extra conditions in there, basically requiring a part, like the artisan manufacturing one, like requires it to be near, like a building, here it is, it's on page F96. Artisan manufacturing must be located on the ground floor. A high volume pedestrian oriented use adjoining the building's entrance on the street is required. Can we just get rid of those limitations and make this easier for people to be more flexible in their uses?
Yes, I'm not sure why that was underlined in the Planning Commission proposed section, but that was in there originally. That was introduced in 2017. The idea was just to make it more pedestrian friendly, so you'd have an entrance of a business at the ground level was the intent behind that. But no, but that's not being changed with these amendments.
So I guess I'm suggesting that we get rid of that restriction on how people use that property, and why can't they have an artisan manufacturing use that's not located on the ground floor? That's all I'm asking. So then, let's see, I think this is my last one. So I looked at the fence one before when constituents had brought this issue to me, that you're allowed to build an 8-foot fence in the back section, but apparently when you come to the city for that, you're required to get an engineering study for anything over 6 foot. So our fence allows for 8 feet, but it sounds like sometimes people have trouble saying, oh, it's worth engineering an 8-foot fence.
I don't believe engineering is required for an 8-foot fence, just
So-
a building permit is required.
When a fence is proposed over 6 feet, you need to get a building permit. I'm not sure at what point you might have to demonstrate just wind load. So as the fence gets higher, of course, there's potential for interaction with wind. But I don't have that answer for you tonight, but I can certainly get it to you for next time. But the clarification is no building permit is required for fences that are 6 feet or lower. A building permit is required for when a fence is above 6 feet.
So I would just suggest, let's make that clear, because otherwise that section reads very clearly. It even defines that lattice as 25% open, which is helpful for people to understand. So knowing that would be valuable.
So just for a direction purpose, can we go through those one by one? Because I'm not sure that you're going to get those changes without a majority of council agreeing with you. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but also, so just from a procedural standpoint, we still need to have a first reading of the ordinances, and we also have a public hearing. It's perfectly fine for council to have our conversation and then open the public hearing, but I'm thinking, let's
do the first reading.
Why don't you review your items quickly so we have them, and then I'll do the first reading.
I just want to voice them now so that I'm not bringing them up right before the second reading and adoption.
I'm just saying I want to agree with them.
Carry on.
Let's do a first reading.
Okay. Also procedurally, we will open the public hearing tonight, close the public hearing tonight, and continue this to our first meeting in November, just a reminder. Okay, I'm going to do the first reading here. An ordinance of the City of Port Angeles, Washington, amending sections of Chapter 17.10 of the Port Angeles Municipal Code relating to zoning, that's residential low density. An ordinance of the City of Port Angeles, Washington, amending sections of Chapter 17.11 of the Port Angeles Municipal Code relating to zoning, also residential low density. An ordinance of the City of Port Angeles, Washington, amending sections of Chapter 17.12 of the Port Angeles Municipal Code relating to zoning, also residential low density. An ordinance of the City of Port Angeles, Washington, amending sections of Chapter 17.21 of the Port Angeles Municipal Code relating to zoning, that's commercial neighborhood. An ordinance of the City of Port Angeles, Washington, amending portions of Chapter 17.22 of the Port Angeles Municipal Code relating to zoning, that's the community shopping district. And an ordinance of the City of Port Angeles, Washington, amending sections of Chapter 17.94 of the Port Angeles Municipal Code relating to zoning, and that's the lot area. So, Lindsay, let's go back to your concerns and address those quickly, or not quickly.
Can you just review, because there were some that I wanted to highlight and make sure that we got directional. Because if we're making significant changes to our ordinances,
So I brought up
Sorry, Council, don't mean to interrupt, but one thing that would be helpful is if, and I know it may take us a little bit more time to do it, but if we can speak to the change where it is in ordinance as opposed to in the staff report.
Yes.
And so far, the page numbers that we've seen referenced are in the staff report, which might be challenging to get the ordinance the way it should be reflected. I also know that on your dais, you do have the most recent version of those ordinances, and I want to make sure we're working off that most recent version of the ordinances that have been put forward. And I apologize, I know that might be a little bit more challenging, but it would be really helpful moving forward.
I think you're right.
Yes, also, we're gonna have to work together to use that attachment, which I agree is the right choice. There are no page numbers on the attachment that we just got, so we're just gonna have to make sure we're all on the same page, literally.
So my first concern was addressed in the ordinances, thank you for that. I then asked a question about apartment definition lowered to 4 units.
And so apartment definition, I agree. And I think that that's a change we should make. Does any other council members agree?
Okay, let's be clear on what changes we're making.
So yeah, is that reflected in the ordinance? That's a good question.
In what ordinance are we going to find apartment defined?
So it would be in all of the R, low density R zones. There are going to be definitions. I'm sorry, I misspoke. They might be there, but anyway, the direction I'm hearing is if we have a definition for apartment, we want to have it correlate, I believe, with the multifamily tax exemption chapter, which we approved.
Correct.
Most recently.
Okay. I like that change as well.
It may require another ordinance just because the definition's in 1708.
Okay.
It's just,
Can you go
I
along?
think the
Trying to keep
definition of
up here.
apartment.
So the
change
definition
4 to
would be
5
a
would be in that
Gotcha.
different chapter.
Okay.
1708.
So maybe that's a future item for an agenda, to change the definition of apartment, if it's not in these actual ordinances.
So let me just clarify. So in our multifamily housing chapter, there is a definition, this is directly from state code. Multifamily housing means a building having 4 or more dwelling units. So I think the idea was that our definition for apartment, which is, getting there. So apartment right now is, apartment building would be a multiple occupancy building other than a hotel or motel that contains 5 or more dwelling units. So I think what I'm hearing is that you would like the change to occur to the definition of apartment building to be 4 or more.
And so that would be a completely
Yes.
new
And
ordinance,
so
right?
that would be a new ordinance, correct?
Right, not one that we're considering tonight, but one that we could request we have at the next meeting?
I mean, this is legal's department, but it's germane to this whole thing. And so
I agree.
an ordinance can modify multiple sections of the municipal code.
Right.
Well, if we get consensus from council tonight on it, we can then come back with you with the solutions, whether it's an ordinance next time or at a future meeting.
So this is important because developers, if they want to get that multifamily housing tax
Right.
credit, they would be able to build an apartment building in the correct zoning that would.
Right, which would be 4 units for the exemptions. So there are 3, is there another council member who?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Great, okay,
And you're next.
next.
So another one was minimum lot size for duplexes. It's the only one we keep a minimum lot size on. And I suggested getting rid of minimum lot size.
I'm somewhat agnostic, I guess I would say. Because I agree with you on the policy that it's, and I also understand what Director Brecky said about too much change too quickly.
That's how I'm feeling at this point, especially because we do have a work session coming up to look at bigger code changes, and we shouldn't miss an opportunity, but I think this is a pretty significant change that we want to be cognizant of.
I'd like to discuss that further in depth later.
Go ahead. Uh-oh. Someone's staticky.
Want to leave the water on? Just a comment. These code changes that we're looking at right now are a dramatic change to the complexion of our city and the construction of our city. Whereas the staff report is very comprehensive, the ordinances that I see in front of me are a little, I'd like a little bit more time to dive into where some of this definitions that you're talking about occur. I'm not seeing the definition of apartment in any of these attachments that we just got. And so, again, don't misunderstand me, I'm not against this, but before we make sweeping changes to these particular ordinances, I would like to get these done, if you will, and then move on, because we are going to have opportunities in the future, especially in November. We're going to look at beginning the process of re-looking at the entire municipal code. So I would just feel more comfortable just getting these proposed changes under our belt, and because we are right here changing a great deal of the complexion of our city, and so by rezoning a lot of these things. Anyway, Just a kind of general comment.
It's Jim's mic. Yep. We got a waterfall. Yes, Sherry, you're next.
So we're really at the point of a public hearing on what's been published, and it seems like we're getting sidetracked to changing a lot of what's been published and being presented tonight. I think it's fair that we have the public hearing on what we're asking people to come and comment on before we make sweeping changes to this ordinance.
I would say that we're not having a public hearing right now, we're having a first reading. We're about to have a public hearing. But right now, we're having a first reading of an ordinance, of a group of ordinances.
Right, I guess I understand what you're saying, Sherry, and my thought is that if council says we actually would like to tweak this a little bit, it would be good for the public to hear that first and then be able to comment on that during the public comment period, in case we all agree that there are a couple of, if there are any tweaks we would like to see potentially when it comes back for a vote. So let's finish Lindsay's couple more items and then we can open the public hearing.
But it sounds like we don't have consensus on getting rid of the minimum lot size right now.
I would agree with that. So let's move to the next item.
So I raised development fees for ADUs, which is PA Municipal Code 13.69.030 and 13.69.040. And basically, you've already developed the water and the sewer on and off the property. Why do you have to pay those fees again when you add an ADU?
So I think, again, that's...
I agree, and that's part of our future work.
Yeah.
I think. Does that make sense?
Because it's not, that is an ordinance
that's-
that we are not considering tonight.
Well,
I understand. It's separate. I see where, it's connected.
I just think
certainly,
there's other future work. So, that was one of the points I was going to make before we got done with this first reading, was that, we also have other tasks in our housing action plan, like implementing incentive zoning with non-cash density offsets and cash offsets, that some of those do require funding, but there's future work to do. This is not a time for us to rest our laurels and think that we've solved all of our housing problems by one zoning change. And I think the development fees are part of that future work. So I agree with you and I want to work for that. I don't think that those are relevant to the first reading of these ordinances.
And then apartments and artisan manufacturing, we've got those extra conditions in them.
Right.
And I agree with you on the artisan manufacturing. What was the apartment one? We already talked about the definitions for 4.
So it's in...
It's on F135.
Well, it's in the ordinances that we were given tonight, which is what we're supposed to be working from. It is in ordinance, it's in chapter 17.21. I don't know what page that is, but if you flip through, it's a little more than halfway. That's commercial neighborhood. Under permitted uses, it is D, which is the last line of the page. Artisan manufacturing. With the current language, which is not a change, according to Director Brecky, it is underlined, but it shouldn't be, which is the qualification that it is located on the ground floor, a high-volume pedestrian-oriented use adjoining the building's entrance on a street is required.
And so I would say that I agree that artisan manufacturing should just be permitted in a commercial neighborhood, period.
I agree also. I think there's stuff that could be on a second floor that you can have access. There are buildings downtown that have the stairwells that go up, like where your office is.
Yeah.
That doesn't help anyone in the audience, but there's an outside stairwell that goes up to the second floor, which you could easily use to access a business on a second floor. I think it would be worth considering anyway. I would be one of a voice to consider that moving forward. That's only 3 of us. Yeah, anyone else?
Okay, so then you are also talking about 17.21.140A on apartments, right? The extra.
Yeah, I did raise the question about apartments. It's basically defining where apartments can be used in the building in a commercial neighborhood zone. So why have that extra requirement is my question.
So I believe that requirement is only in our CN or commercial neighborhood zone. I'm checking just quickly. No, it's also in our CSD, commercial shopping district.
So is there a justification for that, I guess?
I couldn't remember the justification tonight because we weren't proposing to change it. That was from 17. I think the idea there is that CN and CSD zones just, you want to keep kind of like a lower scale of commercial development, but you want to make sure it's pedestrian oriented. We can look back at those notes from previously. But it's certainly not a footnote in every commercial district.
I guess my thought on it is, I get that it means you can't make that apartments, but also if we're gonna have a commercial district where people are gonna walk around and shop, it feels weird to me to have an apartment on the main floor. That you're gonna window shop and here's an apartment. That's just my visual of that. Jim, yes.
Okay, speaking. Okay. You know, what comes to mind immediately to me is Studio Bob's. You know, he's on the second floor, but I guess I don't understand why it has to be on the first floor to be pedestrian oriented. That's a fairly common use in our city, I think, of artisan manufacturing, if you will. And so I have to question that change also. Why does it have to be on the first floor when people like Studio Bob have their studios on the second floor and pedestrians go up a flight of stairs to get to it? I don't understand.
Yeah. So let me try to clarify this, and I apologize, I wasn't prepared to just talk about this item. So the footnote is saying for uses located on the ground floor. So when an artisan manufacturing use is proposed on the ground floor of the building, a high volume pedestrian oriented use adjoining the building's entrance on a street is required. So your example of a small person making, a small business making jewelry, but they don't have a retail component. You know, do you want to have that, you know, non-kind of pedestrian oriented use on a ground floor? And so it's not saying that it has to only, it's not saying that it cannot be on a second floor. It's saying that when it's proposed on a ground floor, you must have some sort of component of your business that is interacting with the pedestrians at the street level. You have your doors open.
So
basically.
I completely misread it. Because located on the ground floor, a high volume pedestrian or use adjoining the building's entrance on the street is required. I assumed that that was a mandate to be on the ground floor in a high volume pedestrian oriented. Yeah.
So you wouldn't have the example of someone just brewing beer but not serving it to the public.
Right.
So
actually kind of like
which becomes more of a really of an industrial type of use.
Right.
So the idea was, you know, small scale manufacturing, which has this term artisan manufacturing, but you want to make sure it's still appropriate for the commercial surrounding.
I get that. I completely misread it. So let's copy edit that sentence. Otherwise it reads like the Second Amendment. Like an independent phrase.
Okay, so going back to A, that was your other concern. I don't have a problem in a commercial or shopping district saying that we shouldn't have housing on the main floor. That's just me. Not at the front anyway.
And my response to that is it's right now it's a vacant building or vacant lot, and I'd rather have it be full.
Fair enough. Well, we can certainly take that up dinner. I mean, we can all think about that too. We don't have to have consensus to change it. We can change it at the time also. Right, we can bring it up again the next meeting. So let's do that, and let's open the public hearing. So, all right, I'm going to open the public hearing. If anyone would like to speak to any of the changes, there are a lot, please feel free to come down and do so. Please state your name and whether you reside in the city for the record, and 3 minutes, please.
Hello, my name is Steve Luxton. I live in the city. I'd like to thank the staff and council for bringing this to us. I know it's been an undertaking getting this here, but these are great improvements for the most part, and I think almost everything here is good. I have some concerns. And as many of you know, the ARU fees to the city have essentially doubled in the last 2 or 3 months here. And there's a number of people sitting on these permits now waiting to get resolution on this because this was unexpected. And if these proposals come in the way that they are now, it's going to create a situation in which duplexes are actually further incentivized than ARU are in our town, which we don't want. And there's multiple reasons we don't want that. The first one is when you drive around a neighborhood, you can see a duplex. An ARU is much more subtle. You don't know that it's there. It's accomplishing the same thing as a duplex, but with a lot less impact on the visual appearance of that neighborhood. Secondly, have you ever seen a homeowner who has a rental in the backyard versus a rental that's owned by somebody in Seattle? You know, in our town, there's a big difference between a homeowner who's closely supervising a rental that's near them and absentee landlords who may end up owning duplexes. Third, people don't really like the idea of duplexes in comparison to ARUs. The people in the city, when you talk about ARUs with them, they say, wow, this is a great benefit that I now can enjoy if I build one of these. When they hear a duplex, they're not thinking that's something they're going to do, and it probably is going to be viewed negatively, and it'll likely be problematic, and it could be something that hinders the council's ability to make changes in the future because people are going to be upset about it. So what I'm suggesting here is that we keep the conditional use for duplexes in the RS7 and the RS9 zoning areas. So at least people, and that may be an administrative process, I think would be better, but at least people would have some input of what's going on. And we can strengthen the conditional use guidelines to help actually figure out what kind of duplexes we want in the city. Additionally, we want to incentivize ARUs rather than duplexes, and to do that, I'm thinking we need to change our development standards for ADUs. We need to make ADUs a little bit bigger so that we have a lot of small houses that are like 700 square feet, and a 350 square foot ARU is not reasonable because of that small 50% floor area requirement. And we need to get rid of this thing about ADUs having separate utility meters and service. That's costing a lot of money. And we need to restore these ARU fees to what they were just a few months ago so we can keep building again. And I've got some documents I'd like to pass out to everybody if that's all right. She's probably heard this before too.
Okay, next person who'd like to speak.
Hi, John Ralston, city resident. And just make sure that I did address I have attended all the meetings for maybe the past 2 years, certainly most of the planning commission meetings, and I certainly spoke at the planning commission meeting when this was, some of the stuff was proposed, and I addressed a letter to the city council on September 27th. Again, I think it's great this young man loves ADUs, and I think it's great that the city is having some discussion about some new building that might happen in the community. I actually own a duplex, and I think it's the nicest looking building within probably a 2-block radius. So And I've seen some ADUs that are also in tough shape. So, you know, goes both ways. And I do think, as according to my letter, that I think that duplexes should be allowed with no lot minimum. Lindsay has been, spoke to some realtors and saw no problem there. I think it'd be a terrific problem if you had neighbors coming to you and saying, here's the problem with a duplex going in here. And then you could turn around and change your game plan and eliminate this thing that I'm suggesting. I also, according to within my letter, suggested some things like doing some sunsetting. And of course, I do like sunsetting. I wasn't clear with Ben's presentation if this density issue is being eliminated. So I want to make sure that in the ordinance where the density thing is eliminated. I also wanted to say that there are several subdivisions within the Port Angeles area that there are lots that are less than 7,000 square feet. You got Henry Pete's, you have Doval and Fogarty's, you have Chambers, you have Grants Additions, and there's some other ones that duplexes would fit in quite nicely. And if you don't eliminate the minimum lot size for a duplex, then these lots that are maybe 5,000, 6,000 square feet would not qualify for one. And then you've got all my other comments here too. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else would like to speak?
Arthur Wojciechowski, city resident. I wasn't clear as far as the definition of the duplex. We own several properties in town here, and they're all single-story homes. And I'm just curious if that excludes raising the roof to create a duplex based on the information. Again, I'm not aware of what the actual wording is, but I think having duplexes that are vertical versus horizontal should be considered, because you can create a common entry that looks like a single-family home, but once you go in, it splits up into multiple residences. So I'm not clear on that, but I definitely think duplexes should be encouraged and definitely is a mandatory need in this community. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Gary Walters, and I'm a homeowner here in Port Angeles. And we live on a 50 by 140 lot, or 55 by 140 lot. And I absolutely built this house here to retire without having a duplex on either side of me. If you're going to put duplexes in town, you need to find the area that these duplexes will be in. And all these residential areas, I wouldn't have built a house here on my lot if I'd have known that you were going to change the damn law so you could put duplexes right next door to me. Why are you doing this? I just don't see the reason. I think you're pushing the whole thing. It's just way too fast. You don't even want to have fees who's going to pay for these auxiliary units in here if you don't have anybody looking at them and paying the fees to get these things hooked up? I mean, it just goes on and on. You're just way ahead of what you need to do. And I don't see the need that you go this far. If you have areas in town that you want to put a duplex in, find it, and then go ask me if I want it next door to me or across the street from me. I just don't buy it at all. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else who would like to speak?
Good evening again, Annie O'Rourke. I do not reside in the city. I'm just talking on behalf of myself. I have some proposals I'd like to pass out to you. I want to focus my conversation more on the code and some concerns that I saw in the I'll just say the words on the text. And so what I've provided to you are 5 different code sections in the ordinance that I'm suggesting we look at a little bit closer. In 1710-010, the purpose for the R7 zone, it talks about consisting of the proposal as a mix of single-family homes, duplexes, and accessory dwelling unit homes. Just from a grammatical standpoint, I think if we delete the word home and add an S to units, it would read much better. They're proposing the deletion of the word standard for the descriptor of town site size lots. Throwing in the word historic, I'm not sure gives us a definition of what it is we're talking about. I'm suggesting we just use the word typical town size lot. So what you're saying is my proposed changes are in red. And then the RS7 with regards to the historical / typical town site size lots would be the same as the RS7. The RS9, RS7 would be the same. With regards to the text in 1712-010 for RS11, there is a strikeout of the text of single-family homes, and I don't think that was intended to be struck out. And again, the reference to the town site size lots. Here it's making it's using a different clause to define this by just a standard sized town site size lot. And again, I'm suggesting we strike out standard sized and use typical as consistency between the different purpose statements for the different zones. In 1794-070, there is a reference to ADU in the last sentence. I think that needs to be struck. It looks like they were probably just doing some quick search and find for all the ARUs. And then in 1794-120, there is a reference there to allowing covered porches into the side yard setback up to 3 feet. This is a building code issue. And I think that we need to strike the side yard setback at this point.
Thank you. Carrie, did you get a copy of this? Okay, I'll pass on. Okay, thank you. Anyone else? Okay, I will go ahead and close the public hearing. And now, council, we need to proceed in some way. I feel like we've gotten a lot of information, but I would like some time to digest. I'm sure staff would as well. So I'm wondering if at this point it would be appropriate to continue to the next meeting so we can take a look at this and then discuss it more.
There's a few follow-ups from the public comment and maybe some more things that would be good to prepare in anticipation of the second reading.
Okay. So,
I just have a quick comment.
Yes.
In regard to public comment, we have so many, we have mixed-use town, obviously, but we have many single-family homes. So what is our point? Are we trying to create a building code that is going to devalue the single-family homes and create a town predominantly of renters? We need more housing, I get that. But the purpose of zoning is to have areas where you have different types of home opportunities, apartments, duplexes, triplexes, whatever. I just want to make sure what we're doing is that we understand we don't regulate to the point that we devalue the single-family homes and the homeowners in this community, because they are the foundation of our taxpayers and our community. So while we need all kinds, and I've lived in apartments and condos and owned homes, and they're all important, but I think we have to make sure that what we do does not devalue one important part of our housing development in favoring others and to get things out of balance. So that's just what we really need to keep in mind.
Thank you.
Well, as the council member's repeated use of the word devalue suggests that there's a concern that property values are affected by adjacent homeowners, say adding an accessory dwelling unit in their back, or the adjacent property owner building a duplex. As far as I've been able to tell, and I've really tried to look for this, there is no research to support that claim. When you look across the research on real estate, the conclusion is back to probably the 80s or so. Researchers were trying to find that, and they're like, no, we're not seeing it. So they've stopped even researching that question because it's been settled. That building more density in a residential area does not devalue a property owner's property. So if you've got contrary evidence to that, please do present it. I've tried to find your claim, and I can't find research to support it. In terms of the need, this is some information I put together when I approached the Port Angeles Realtors about the duplex minimum lot size issue back in March of this year. I believe there's probably a newer data set from the US Census. So this is the 2017 census data, which was the most current as of March of this year. So I also should say that this is the 1-year estimates, not the 5-year estimates. So it's countywide, not just Port Angeles, because Port Angeles is only done on 5-year estimates, so it's not as accurate for tracking year-to-year changes. So, and I'm trying to address, like, why are we making these changes, right? So compared to the previous year, the Clallam County population increased 904 people, and our total number of housing increased by 844 units. Since the average household size is above 2, that means the number of new housing units increased more than the number of new households. To support that good news, the rental vacancy rate increased by 1.4%. However, the new rental vacancy rate, 3.2%, is still about half of what our target should be at about 6%. Second point, though, is that when we dive into the data more closely, things don't look so good, especially for working families in Clallam County. Between the new set of data and the previous year data, we lost 1,239 rental units with rent less than $1,000. So even though we built a lot more units, we had 844 units countywide, we lost 1,239 units with rent less than $1,000. So the census also reports the median rent went up by $82. That's $82 a month. And research has shown that for every $100 per month increase in rent, the percentage of people experiencing homelessness goes up as much as 32% in rural areas. And that's from Bierns et al., New Perspectives on Community Level Determinants of Homelessness in Journal of Urban Affairs, volume 35, page 607 from 2013. The number of households with gross rent equal to or higher than 35% of household income went up by 441 households. That means that 441 more households in our county do not have a
Point of order, please. What we're talking about here is not rental properties, we're talking about construction and rezoning. With that in mind, I would appreciate you either restrict your remarks to the current, what's on the table, or conclude your remarks.
So a lot of these developments probably would become rentals. I do think if you can wrap it up a little bit, that would be helpful.
Yeah, so that's some of the reason for why. I don't understand the objection, but we can certainly have more of a conversation about that. In terms of some of the comments, I don't think we have to choose between duplexes and ADUs. I think it's a yes and approach, although I'd love to hear a debate between Steve and John on something like that. I pay money for that. So one comment that I saw specifically would be concerning when we add in, when a homeowner adds an ADU and their primary dwelling is smaller. The current ADU code, and this is in the packet at page F143, and it's PA Municipal Code 17.94.070, subpart D, is that the gross floor area for the ADU shall not exceed 50% of the gross floor area of the primary single-family residence. I'd like to see an addition to that, such as it reads, shall not exceed 50% of the gross floor area of the primary single-family residence, or exceed 600 square foot, whichever is greater. Maybe 600 square foot, I'm making that up right now, but something so that if somebody's primary residence, 600 square feet would basically be, well, what if the primary residence is 1,000 square foot? That means the ADU is 500 square feet. There's, I think, an opportunity to have things be slightly larger. What if the primary building is 800 square feet? That means you're building an ADU of about 400 square feet. Having lived in a 400 square foot apartment in Port Angeles, it's pretty tight. Also, I think the height question is a worthwhile question to look at. There's something in there about 30-foot heights, but it's unclear if the primary building is smaller, the ADU then is kind of stuck below that height. And in terms of development, maybe somebody's like, okay, we've got a small building on the front of our lot. There's a lot of lots in Port Angeles like that, where you've got a really small house. They want to build an ADU. Maybe they then want to build a larger primary house. You can't really go in that order because the ADU has to be scaled to the primary building, and there's no independent minimums for the size of the ADU. So I would like to see that.
I just want to make,
Mike?
I just want to make 2 points around the property values discussion. So, I think that we've already exhausted this topic, just to be clear. I'm sorry that we're still talking, but I would say that a lack of development is a bigger risk to property values. And that's what we're seeing with the stagnating development economy. As our housing stock ages, that's a risk to property values. Development is not. And the goal of getting a higher rental vacancy rate is a good goal outside of this in a bigger policy picture, because that encourages vested rental owners to improve their existing properties. And in all of these cases, that's a good long-term strategy. Increasing property values increases homeowners' value, and it also increases the city's tax revenue. But the general point is development spurs development. Our goal is more density. That's in our strategic plan. And I think this is exemplary work by the Planning Commission and by our staff. And honestly, a lot of this was spurred by the public, and we really appreciate the involvement that the public has had in this issue.
Okay, so council, how do we want to move forward? What does staff feel like they need at this point? I guess maybe the starting point for that question.
So again, staff is looking for any consensus on changes to the ordinances in front of you tonight, so that we are able to do those changes and have them presented to you with your second reading.
Right. So you got the earlier issues. Those were noted.
And council, we have reviewed the earlier issues that were brought up. I believe one of those issues did receive council consensus. There's another one that I think we should look at from a language perspective, and then there are some others that did not receive council consensus.
Which one is the language issue that you're referring to?
The language issue was artesian manufacturing, just making sure that language is clear.
Okay. Yes, thank you. So.
And I would also just chime in that a lot of the ADU stuff, I think, should have that can be part of our future work. Because I agree. I think that we should go to the 60% or have some other workaround there. I do think that those are reasonable changes. I'm not sure that the ordinances before us are where, and maybe I'm wrong that this is the time to do it, but I think that the ordinance before us is looking into that. And the public hearing that happened at the Planning Commission, I don't think really was about that.
So you think you're actually going to move that forward? This is repeated multiple times, that this is at least 80 hours of staff time. We're not Ferndale, where apparently they can roll out little code changes all the time. We have to do comprehensive studies, spend all this time going back and forth before we even dot an I.
So the main issue, the two main issues that were raised that I feel like I want to understand we're still discussing is, the size of the ADU as it relates to the existing structure, and whether or not, I think we already discussed that there was not a consensus on no minimum lot size for duplex. So then what we're looking at is the size of the ADU, whether we want to include that right now or move forward as it's written and address that later. So is there consensus on the change to the ADU size, which is 17.94.070. I'm going off this handout, so I'm going to assume it's right because I can't find it quickly. D, maximum unit size, and H is addressed also.
I agree on D, that we should change it to 60%. But again, we don't have an ordinance before us that's amending that chapter, although I understand that is
well, we do
necessarily
because we do.
We do?
It's
Okay,
a
fine.
17.94.070 development standards for accessory dwelling units. It's the third to last page of the handout we were given tonight on the back side.
Okay, then I agree. Yes, 60%.
Is there a building code that we would be violating to make that change?
So I think the primary issue is that you need to realize it's no longer accessory.
Right, it becomes a duplex.
It's called an accessory dwelling unit for a reason. If you want to make a second unit within your house, for example, it's bigger, you know, one is bigger than the other, it could be a duplex. Now, if you're looking at the typical ADU that's a detached structure, and you have the existing house that's small, I would still argue that there's, you know, it's still supposed to be accessory in nature to the principal house. Now, we can look at other options in the future, and I also just mentioned most cities have specific square footage restrictions for ARUs, and they are being dropped because they're too restrictive. So if you put just a random number out there, it becomes actually problematic. Our argument is that you use the existing form or existing structure on the lot as your guide to how big it can go. Of course, you can always add to your house. You know, there's just, the possibilities are still there.
Okay, thank you for that clarification.
Let me clarify what I was proposing for Port Angeles Municipal Code 17.94.070 subpart D, which is that rather than simply have the maximum ADU unit size as shall not exceed 50% of the gross floor area of the primary single-family residence, I'm suggesting shall not something like, and we can argue the semantics of this, shall not exceed 50% of the gross floor area of the primary single-family residence or exceed 600 square foot, whichever is greater. In other words, in a situation where somebody has a small primary residence, like an 800 square foot house, they're not limited to a 400 square foot ADU. They could build up to whatever that limit that we set. I'm suggesting 600, maybe it's 500. I don't want to argue the semantics of what accessory means, but you know, when we're scaling it directly to the big house without a cap, we're potentially limiting the ability for somebody to build a viable ADU in their backyard.
So I guess my response to that is what, you know, the implications, what are we trying to incentivize? And if we have a large lot with a very small house on it, wouldn't we rather incentivize them to just demolish the house and build a larger structure like a duplex or an apartment building or what, you know, whatever else would fit for that zoning?
Yeah, but maybe order of operations, like they're going to build the ADU and then build a bigger house. I mean, I want to give people flexibility and choices in how they use their property. Why are we trying to restrict people's private property use here?
But we're contradicting what Ms. Brecky just said.
Yeah.
Ms. Brecky, would you please
Repeat
that?
Well, I just wanted to mention just the flexibility of the example that Lindsay just mentioned was if someone is coming into us with a building permit to increase the house size, but they want to build the ADU first, we have allowed that. You know, it just needs to be reflected in the building permit plan. So again, the city is very flexible. But What we're talking about is essentially you're changing, again, most cities are removing the square footage limitation. They have found that that actually creates more limitations, and staff at this point is not supportive of allowing a second structure to be built on the lot that is bigger than the principal house and still to call that an accessory dwelling unit.
But that's not what I'm proposing. What I'm saying is, quote, shall not exceed 500 square foot of the gross floor area of the primary single-family residence or exceed 600 square foot, whichever is greater. So unless the primary residence is 600 square feet or less, I'm not proposing that the ADU be larger than the primary residence.
Okay, so you've made your proposal, and I'm curious whether we have a consensus on that, and then I think we should move forward. I think we've then addressed all the issues. So is there a consensus on adding that 600 square foot piece?
I mean, I think what Lindsay's suggesting is more flexible. So I would agree with him, but
Okay, all right. So I'm not hearing consensus. So let's move forward. I'm going to continue this until the next meeting, November 6th. Does staff feel like you have enough direction?
Yeah, I think we have sufficient direction for now. Just think it's good to make the note for public awareness. Our regularly scheduled council meetings typically fall on a Tuesday. In this instance, the meeting on the 6th of November has actually been moved by one day to avoid election night, just for public's awareness. Right. It will occur on a Wednesday evening, starting at 6 p.m.
So you are correct when you say, wait, the 6th, we keep referring to the 6th, that is a Wednesday, and that's on purpose so that everyone can pay attention to what's happening with the election. Okay, are there any late items? Going back to the top. Any late items?
None from staff.
Okay. All right, hearing none from council, we'll move on to the consent agenda. I would like to propose that we move items G1 and G2 to the consent agenda. That is the ordinance adopting changes to the term limits for lodging tax advisory committee members and the ordinance amending the public records chapter 2.74, which is a procedural issue, procedural.
I have no
chapter. I'm just consensus. And does anyone have an opposition to that? Okay, then I will read the consent agenda. Expenditure report from September 21st, 2019 and October 4th, 2019 in the amount of $2,109,641.78. An ordinance adopting changes to term limits for lodging tax advisory committee members, and an ordinance amending public records chapter 2.74.
I move the consent agenda as read. Sorry.
Second.
Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, passes unanimously. And now we're on to council reports. Am I right? Oh, I know, one more. It's not technically a late item, but I would entertain a motion to excuse Sissy from tonight's meeting.
So moved.
Second.
All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That also passes unanimously. Thank you. Didn't want to forget that. All right, council reports. I don't remember which side we started at last time, so let's start with Sherry, please.
We had a contingent from Mutsu, Japan, our sister city in town, and had a couple of lovely dinners. They had an amazing time, and a couple of those people were, when I went to Mutsu, so they were friends that greeted us when we went to Mutsu. It was lovely to have them here. So next year is our 25th anniversary of our sister city, and in January the mayor is coming. And I've been attending all the Mutsu events since the last 12 years I've been on council, so I would like to also be here to greet them when they come for their 25th anniversary. It was very special. And I have had different topics, so many compliments on the new, beautiful Lawrenson Boulevard. It's a pleasure to drive, and I'm not a big bicycler, but I may become, because there's bicycle lanes, you can walk, you can ride, you can drive, you can cross and not take your life at risk crossing now. People are just, so thank you, Mr. Hunter, for compliments to Public Works, because everyone just really loves the new Lawrenson Boulevard, and I do too, so thank you very much.
Get the easy one out of the way first. So November 6th, whether it's Tuesday or Wednesday, I will not be here. And then went to Crab Fest over the weekend, wall-to-wall people. It was amazing how fast downtown started to fill up on Friday, to the unfortunate point that you could not even get 2 trucks side by side down Front Street, because people were parallel parked 2 feet from the curb. There was some very poorly timed construction going on in the area also, and hopefully our contractors can be more aware of what's happening on certain days. But it was nice, didn't rain. A lot of out-of-town folks down there, and even right up to closing, it was completely packed full. And I also noticed that there were several people, even though the Crab Fest was down there, that were eating at restaurants besides the Crab Fest. So that was nice to see also. And I know Mr. French does a lot of breakfast, so maybe he noticed the difference more, but I noticed that Coca-Cola was full, and a couple of the other restaurants around town were full, so it was great to see. Brings a lot of people in.
So just echoing that, what I noticed about Crab Fest is it shows how far people walk from where they park to get to where they're going. So I want to thank the North Olympic Library System for hosting an event last night on Indigenous Peoples Day. They cited the ordinance we passed last year in their announcement for that, and so I'm glad that they took the lead in doing something public on that day. I do think that we should look at some of the things we've talked about in regard to recognizing the Indigenous history of Port Angeles. We've had a discussion about when we replace street signs, we can put them up in both English and Nusquam, and let's do that. So I would like to see us move forward with some of those ideas. Also, while talking about the North Olympic Library System, I don't know if people have recently read or noticed their change in fee structure. The library forgave about $500,000 of unpaid fees. It's like Jubilee at the library. They no longer have late fees. And research in other libraries have found that people are more likely to return their late items when they don't pay a late fee. And it's not like you pay a late fee when you return the item, you can slip it in, but then you actually can come back to the library. And they're already seeing that. They've had a number of library patrons who had discontinued using the library, but have now resumed using the library now that they forgave late fees. So it's making the library more accessible to the entire community. They're tracking the data here locally, so hopefully they'll kind of compile that at some point when it makes sense and share how the kind of studies from other libraries have affected what they've seen locally. Maybe we're an abomination and everyone in Port Angeles and Collin County really cares about fees, but I'm guessing that the policy here is going to have a similar effect. Last week, I went to the Association of Washington Cities Regional Cities Gathering along with the Deputy Mayor and the City Manager. Thank you both. We discussed the Association of Washington Cities legislative priorities, which are available on awcnet.org, AWC's website. And a lot of it, I think, is still this question of how does the county not, what's the saying, rob Peter to pay Paul? That the state's been pulling away from the Public Works Trust Fund, for example, in order to meet its court-ordered culvert requirements, which absolutely it needs to do. But it's going to prioritize its culverts over the county or city culverts that are right downstream or right upstream. How do we get them to work together and actually make that policy more effective? So I think there's some larger fiscal issues that we kind of hinted at earlier in this meeting that AWC continues to lobby on our behalf and on behalf of all the other, 281 cities and towns in Port Angeles. I attended a Jurassic Parliament webinar, and we mentioned Jurassic Parliament before. I think her name's Anne McFarland, is excellent parliamentarian who actually made me like Robert's Rules of Order, which I didn't previously like. But again, that resource is out there, I think, for us as the council, and I'd like us to, maybe when we have more new council members next year, and also involve the chairs of the various advisory committees, do some more work on chairing meetings and that sort of thing. And Jurassic Parliament is a great resource for that. And finally, I just want to apologize that I'm going to miss Director Carrizoza's excellent presentation next week on budget work session. I will be out of town. Thank you.
Okay, I attended a few meetings. The Port Angeles Downtown Association had a meeting. Not a lot of discussion. We kind of did a wrap up of arts and crafts. And I attended the Peninsula Tourism Commission, which I won't be, I did talk to Director Becky about someone attending for the next, they're doing they're not doing a tourism summit this year, but they're doing an annual meeting, and so I think staff will be attending. At our last meeting, the one real big note that came out of it was research on short-term rentals. I can't remember the website that they got this from, but the top 3 destinations in the entire state for short-term rentals, number 1 is Seattle. Obviously, they have a very large population and a very large, supply. Second is Spokane, and third is Port Angeles, which is shocking. I'm assuming that includes Port Angeles addresses, which will include a lot of the county. But it is an incredibly popular destination. That shows that we do have a desperate need of a supply for more hotel rooms, because people are not finding the accommodations they need. Of course, people have a variety of needs for their accommodations and desires. Some people want to stay at the lake, and we're not going to get a hotel at the lake, but we definitely have a supply issue where people want to come here because it's an amazing place. So that's a good problem to have, but it really was a shocking fact that we're beating out some huge population centers for attractiveness of our destination. And I did get to meet with Marcia, the director of the Peninsula Visitors Bureau, who heads the OPTC, privately afterwards, and talked about kind of where our allocations are that we passed in our last meeting about our LTAC, and how maybe we've gone a little too far in the market. And one thing that I'm going to suggest that we revisit next year is, when we talk about allocations for marketing, a percentage number is not the appropriate way to talk about that. We have a real dollar value that we probably want to put on marketing that's probably in that $200,000 to $250,000 range. And that's not going to change based on the projected revenues that we get. Whether our revenue projections go up or down, more money can always be put into marketing. There's always supplemental things that you can do, but we're going to want to have a baseline of probably around $200,000 to $250,000, whether the LTAC money kind of dips or whether it surges, as it has been surging. And so I think that a percentage allocation is the wrong way to do it from a policy perspective, and we've erred. So I think we should revisit that. It's probably too late for this year, but we definitely should revisit that for next year. And then yes, Crab Fest happened. That directly contributed to me not being as prepared for this meeting as I would like to have been, because definitely we were busy, definitely downtown was busy. It is the one weekend of the year where I think everyone agrees that there's not enough parking downtown. And I'll say that, in the summer, my business is very, very busy people always ask me what my busiest weekend of the year is, and I always say it's a random weekend in August. I can never, who knows? We don't have anywhere close to the parking issues on random weekends in August that we do on Crab Fest weekend. And so it's a really unprecedented amount of people that come to downtown to experience Crab Fest. It's really a delight. It's amazing that it happens in October and not in the direct marketing season for downtown. But yeah, it was, I think, probably their biggest year they've ever had. Thank you to our deputy mayor for helping me organize a public official to go to their tasting contest. I hope that Candace had fun. But yeah, my weekend was definitely waking up early and baking things for all those people that wanted to eat breakfast before they went to Crab Fest. So thank you, that's it.
Jim?
I have no report.
Okay, I just have a brief report, which not surprisingly includes Crab Fest. I was privileged to give a bit of a welcome address from the city, and that was great. And then Candace Pratt, the deputy mayor from SQUIM, good gracious, from SQUIM, and I had the opportunity to have lunch with Councillor Loveday from Victoria, and that was nice to visit with them. And just a note from as to the draw of Crab Fest, while we were waiting for lunch, we were standing on front, and a van from the city of Linwood drove by. So people came from far and wide. I consider Linwood a pretty far distance for a city-organized Parks and Rec van to be bringing people to downtown Port Angeles. So I thought that was pretty cool. And one other thing I want to mention, just because I want to put it out there and make sure people know about it, I was able to participate in, at no cost, because of grant funding, the mental health first aid training yesterday. And if anyone has any interest at all, I would highly recommend it. I just think it certainly doesn't hurt to have more tools in your toolbox. So with that, I will turn it over to city manager reports.
Deputy Mayor and Council, I don't have a lot for you this evening, but we do have on page L1 of your packet the latest as far as upcoming schedule and meetings. Most importantly, as mentioned in a prior presentation, October 22nd from 5 p.m. to 7 p.m., we have a work session on the 2020 budget. Our apologies in advance to Annie, in that we'd love to make your ribbon cutting that day, but I think at this point it does look like we have a conflict with the city council meeting. I do think it's important to share with council that we may also have an action item at that meeting relative to collective bargaining. We anticipate that that's likely the case, and we'll need to consider that on the 22nd as well. I think that's it from staff. We really appreciate council's input this evening. We'll be coming back to you with some of the items you requested.
Thank you. All right, that brings us to our second and final public comment period. Same rules apply, name and whether or not you're a city resident, and 3 minutes if there's anyone who would like to speak.
Andy O'Rourke, just a comment with regards to the utility increases that occurred earlier this evening. The Peninsula Housing Authority obviously saw a pretty significant increase in what we're going to be paying for MEDIC. And we're a government entity. We're an entity that doesn't have the ability to levy fees, raise rates. We have no ability to generate income. And this has a direct impact on how we help our folks and how many folks we can help. So it's unfortunate the documentation for the meeting. I didn't even get a chance to start looking at the electrical piece, the issues of the utility piece until this afternoon late. So I really didn't have an opportunity to present at public comment, but I just wanted to get it out there that we're just not in the same situation as a lot of folks with regards to raising your rates, raising your rents, adding a tax or anything along those lines. Those are fees that we simply have to pay that impact our staffing, impact how many folks we can help. So thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else who'd like to speak?
I'm Steve Luxton, live in the city. I just wanted to address the ARU fees one more time. In the single page I handed out, I actually had some potential solutions, and So I've developed a few of these ARUs in the city, and I came to pick up a permit to begin a construction of another ARU that is going to be a rental. And I saw that the cost, the total amount of fees had doubled, and that was essentially what happened was a water system development charge was tacked on there, which is over $2,000, even though the primary, this is accessory to a primary structure. And I do projects based on what kind of financing I can get for them. And so for me, having this unexpected change, just that's only happened in the last few months, was a surprise. And that's something that I have to pass on to tenants. And this is a project that is not something that I'm going to be doing next year. It's something that I'm going to be doing as soon as I get this permit. I'm running a backhoe and I'm digging this foundation. So, relief in these things does have impact, and it impacts me and it impacts the people that are going to live in this place in the future. Thank you. Everybody's tired. I'm tired.
Thank you. Sorry, anyone else?
Arthur Wojnowski, city resident. I just wanted to add one more view on duplexes as opposed to the ADUs or ARUs, whatever we're calling it. From an environmental standpoint, by being able to go up as opposed to out, we still save green space and common areas for our yards too. So that's another thing to think about.
Thank you. All right. Anything else? Anyone else? All right. Seeing no more, we will be adjourned.